other groups of victims of state failure. We'll keep him and the House updated.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A constituent of mine who attends Dudley Voices for Choice and has autism with complex mental health needs and is at risk of self-harm can't use the telephone but is still required by mental health services to do so. They're not being able to be treated, they're being told that they're non-compliant and their support was therefore reduced. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to ensure mental health services offer alternative ways to communicate to those that can't use the telephone? And I'd like to thank Sarah Offley and the team for Voices for Choice.
I thank you for that question. We are recruiting 8,500 more mental health workers by the end of this Parliament, and also the Mental Health Act reforms will ensure people with a learning disability, autistic people, as well as people with the most severe mental health conditions, have greater choice and control over their treatment and receive the dignity and the respect that they deserve.
Final question, Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Constituents of mine have been reporting that they've been directed to hospital for regular blood tests rather than having them at their GP surgery. Would the Secretary of State please outline how he'll ensure blood tests are taken in a community setting? Surely that must be much better value for the taxpayer and much more convenient for patients.
He's absolutely right, and that's why a big part of our modernisation approach is to shift care out of hospital into the community, making greater use of community diagnostic centres, community pharmacies and GPs. But as the honourable gentleman's question shows, 18 months in, lots done, but a lot more still to do.
Right, we'll let the front bench change over. The urgent question. Shadow Minister Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government if he will make a statement on the released unredacted plans for the proposed Chinese embassy.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This question relates to the proposals for a new Chinese embassy at Royal Mint Court. This is a decision to be taken by planning ministers independent of the rest of government. As I've said before in this House, this government is committed to the probity of the planning process at all levels to ensure robust and evidence-based decision-making. Planning ministers must take decisions following a quasi-judicial process, meaning they must take decisions fairly, based on evidence and planning rules. As the case is currently before the Department for consideration, and due to ministers' statutory role in the planning process, it would be entirely inappropriate for me to comment further on this live case. That said, Mr Speaker, I understand fully members' interest in the case, and so I can briefly set out the process this case has followed to date. A public inquiry into the applications was held by an independent planning inspector between the 11th and 19th of February 2025. The Department received the inspector's report into the applications on the 10th of June that year. On the 6th of August 2025, a reference back letter was sent to parties seeking further information, specifically in respect of the redacted plans and some issues raised by the Home Office and Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office from parties, and that was recirculated for further comment on the 22nd of August and again on the 16th of October, 2nd of December and 17th of December, and recirculated for information on the 6th of January 2026. Referring back to parties is routine when further information is required. The Government does not provide a running commentary on planning casework decisions, as you know, Mr Speaker, and it would be particularly inappropriate to make any comment on material which has been received. The reference back material will be available on request when the decision is issued. The timetable has been varied to allow full consideration of the applications, given the detailed nature of the representations provided and the need to give parties sufficient opportunity to respond. A final decision will now be made on or before the 20th of January 2026. The variation to the timetable is routine when additional time is needed for determination. Members can be assured, and I'm afraid, Mr Speaker, I will be required to state the following ad nauseam, that ministers will take all material planning considerations into account when the final decision is made, and ministers will inform the House of the decision accordingly.
In fairness, as you brought me into it by saying, as I will know about planning, absolutely. But I didn't choose for you to be the minister that answered this. I would have thought, actually, it would have been the Home Office and the Security Minister. So please, Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It is very disappointing to get a technocratic history lesson rather than answer to the meaningful question.
Exactly.
208 secret rooms and a hidden chamber just 1 metre from cable serving the City of London and the British people. That is what the unredacted plans tell us that the Chinese Communist Party has planned for its new embassy if the government gives them the go-ahead. Indeed, we now know they plan to demolish the wall between the cables and their embassy, cables on which our economy is dependent, cables carrying millions of British people's emails and financial data, an access that would give the Chinese Communist Party a launchpad for economic warfare against our nation. The Home Office and the Foreign Office say security concerns have been addressed. So I put to the Minister, had any minister seen these unredacted plans before the Telegraph uncovered them? And if not, why not? Was Parliament misled when we were told that all documents were publicly available? Is it true that in December a briefing was given to Five Eyes partners on these risks? And does the Minister really have no concerns at all over plans to install heavy ventilation equipment parallel to these cables? What is that for? If the government is as shocked as we are today on this, have the ministers already called in the Chinese ambassador to explain these secret rooms? Yeah. And if not, why not? The embassy would create a daily headache for our security services. What confidence can we have that the CCP's technological capabilities can be contained for a decade, let alone 10? I have consistently asked the government to require the Chinese to pay for any rerouting of cables if they're going to give this the go-ahead. So will the government commit to that today? The Prime Minister, we understand, is planning to visit Beijing this month. Is it true the embassy will be approved this week? That the Prime Minister plans to reward the Communist Party, holding a British national hostage, torturing him in confinement, who put spies at the heart of our democracy, is bad enough. To turn up with a gift in hand begging for handouts is beggar's belief, because Labour promised a new relationship with China, yet UK export goods are down 23%. Surrendering our security for Chinese trade was always a bad policy, but surrendering our security while exports plummet is frankly insanity. The government can claim today that they had no idea about these secret rooms, and we will take them at that word. But they cannot now say they have no power to protect us. Protect our economy, protect the British people, deny the Chinese Communist Party their embassy.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Shadow Minister for her questions. I'm obviously not going to comment on speculation in the press. When it comes to the specific case that's before ministers, at the application stage, it was a matter for parties what information was put forward for consideration, and it was a matter for Tower Hamlets what information was put on the planning register and the inquiry website. We've not misled the House. All inquiry documents are publicly available on that website. If new, potentially relevant information is drawn to the Department's attention, it will be assessed. This includes consideration of its relevance and whether it's necessary to obtain that information or refer back to parties, and that is a routine process. The Secretary of State transparently sought further information on the redacted drawings via a reference back letter to parties issued on the 6th of August. I again say, Mr. Speaker, no decision has been made on the case. I cannot comment on individual aspects of the case. It would be entirely inappropriate for me to comment on any matter of national security or on behalf of the security services. All inquiry documents, including the redacted drawings put forward by the applicant at application stage, are publicly available on the Tower Hamlets website. When the final decision is published, the decision letter will contain a list of post-inquiry representations, including those received as part of the reference back exercise. These will be publicly available on request.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, multiple government agencies and government departments have raised concerns about this mega embassy. Our international partners have raised concerns about it. Every security briefing I had identifies China as a hostile state to the UK. I am in no doubt that this mega embassy should not be allowed to go ahead. Internationally, China is terrorising the people of Hong Kong. It is terrorising the democratic people in Taiwan, and it is terrorising some people already in the UK. I look to my local University of Sheffield Hallam, and I also look to what it's doing to parliamentarians right here. I want my government to stand up to bullies, not reward them. We need to be seeing rules, limits put in place around China to stop this behaviour, not rewarding them with the embassy that they so dearly want.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her questions. I note and appreciate her concerns. We need a consistent position on China, Mr. Speaker, which cannot be boiled down to one word. We recognise that China poses a series of threats to UK national security, and we challenge these robustly. China also presents opportunities to the UK as the world's second largest economy and the UK's third largest trading partner. We will therefore continue to develop a consistent and pragmatic approach to economic engagement without compromising our national security. On the matter of Hong Kong in particular, we will not tolerate any attempts by foreign governments to coerce, intimidate, harass or harm their critics overseas, especially in the UK. But on the matter before us, Mr. Speaker, which is the particular case in question, as I have stressed before, and I'm afraid I will have to do so repeatedly, no decision has been made. I cannot comment on any aspects of the case. It's a live case for planning ministers to determine. All material considerations will be taken into account when making a decision, but I'm afraid I can't comment on any specific national security concerns.
Colin Miller, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The redacted plans for the Chinese super embassy provide new reasons to reject this application. Can the Minister confirm whether the Government had access before today to these unredacted plans showing the proximity of basements to critical communications cabling? And will he and other ministers ensure that the intelligence agencies update their risk assessments before a final decision is taken? On the 16th of December, the Government told this House that an urgent review would be launched into foreign financial interference in UK politics, including by China. So will the Minister now agree to pause any decision on the super embassy until the Rycroft review has reported? The new super embassy would also condemn Hong Kongers living in Britain to more surveillance, more intimidation and more bounty hunting. On Saturday, hundreds of Hong Kongers are expected to join a protest outside the proposed super embassy site. Will the Minister or a colleague meet with the protesters on Saturday outside the embassy to listen to their concerns firsthand?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions. I want to be very clear on what information the department had and when it had it. As I said, an independent inquiry into this matter was held by an independent planning inspector. The onus is on the applicant to submit documents to that inquiry. It is then at the gift of the department, at the point the inspector's report was given to us, to request via a reference back to parties further information. We did so on the 6th of August, specifically in respect of those redacted plans. And I'm not going to comment on live applications of the case. All material considerations will be taken into account. Just as similar, Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be right for me to comment on the intelligence services or what input they've had into the decision. The National Security Minister is beside me here, who's taken this. A decision will be made on or before the 20th of January. At the point that decision is issued, the decision letter will contain, as I've said, a list of post-inquiry representations, including those received as part of the reference back exercise, and that will be publicly available on request.
Uma Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. China has used their national security law to criminalise political dissent and target Hong Kongers in the UK. My constituency, Stratford and Bow, is home to one of the largest Hong Konger populations in our country. They tell me how scared this proposed Chinese mega embassy is in our neighbouring constituency in East London. What assurances can the Minister offer that this government, the British government, will stand up for the people of Hong Kong and that this proposed embassy won't enable and embolden further coercion, further intimidation of Hong Kongers in the UK, particularly those in London?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. I'd repeat what I said specifically, Mr. Speaker, about transnational repression. We won't tolerate any attempts by foreign governments to coerce, intimidate, harass or harm their critics overseas, especially in the UK. But on the matter of this decision that is before planning ministers, it will be taken independent of the rest of government. Planning ministers must take decisions following a quasi-judicial process, meaning, Mr. Speaker, they must make decisions fairly based on evidence and planning rules. And I stress again, all material considerations will be taken into account in reaching a decision.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
This is the National Parliament, and it deserves answers. I've asked this question to the Minister sitting next to him already, and I got no answer at all. This may seem a subsidiary point, but it's important. On January the 14th, the Secretary of State wrote to the Chinese demanding an answer, as well as going to be a perimeter wall so that the public can access the buried Cistercian monastery there. With typical arrogance, the Chinese haven't even replied. Now, why is this important? Because if ministers insisted on what they wrote about in January, there'd have to be an entirely new planning permission. So this site, near the Tower of London, where so many prisoners of conscience died over the centuries, who knows, maybe the prayers of medieval monks might finally stop this aberration.
Minister.
I'm afraid all I can say to the right honourable gentleman, who I have a huge amount of respect for, is that all material considerations will be taken into account in reaching a decision on this case.
Alex Sherville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Joint Committee on Human Rights undertook an inquiry on transnational repression earlier this year. It found the Chinese state undertakes considerable transnational repression against the Chinese diaspora in the United Kingdom, much of it coordinated out of the existing Chinese embassy. This new super embassy is a real threat to Hong Kongers, to Uyghurs and other members of Chinese diaspora that don't toe the party line in Beijing. Can the Minister reassure me that transnational repression of the Chinese diaspora is a material consideration when making this planning decision?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. The Foreign Secretary has been robust on human rights, Mr. Speaker, including in Xinjiang. He's raised our concerns about the implementation of, for example, the national security law in Hong Kong, called for the immediate release of Jimmy Lai. We're forthright when it comes to human rights with the Chinese government. I am not going to, I'm afraid, comment on a live case in front of planning ministers as to what specific material considerations will be taken into account, but they all will be, I can assure my honourable friend.
Sir Julian Lewis.
The Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament had an opportunity to question not the deputy but the actual National Security Advisor about this matter. If the minister says he doesn't know, then he's the wrong minister to be answering this urgent question. If he says he does know but can't say because it's highly classified, let me assure him that the identity of witnesses who are interviewed at that level by the Intelligence and Security Committee is not private. It is published whenever the committee has a mind to do so. So will he answer that question, please, in a straightforward way? Were the ISC given the opportunity to question the National Security Advisor?
Minister.
Well, I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, it's for the ISC, not me, to comment on its proceedings. What I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that national security is, of course, the first duty of government. It won't be appropriate for me in this instance to comment on any specific matters of national security, but as I continue to repeat, all relevant planning considerations will be taken into account when making a decision on this case.
Russian Narata.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend will be aware of the concerns that I've written to the Secretary of State about, highlighted by my constituents, within which this embassy is proposed. Can he reassure me, while I recognise the planning dimension and the limits to what he can say, can he nonetheless reassure me and the House that the concerns of residents, the security and human rights concerns as well as wider local concerns, will be taken seriously as part of the process, not least because this is in an area with one of the largest Muslim populations in the country, and we're all aware of the persecution of Uyghur Muslims that this House has campaigned for among the wider human rights violations.
Minister.
Well, as I've said, Mr. Speaker, all material considerations will be taken into account when making the decision. It is open, Mr. Speaker, for any party to make representations on this case. A number of honourable members from across the House have done so, and all relevant planning considerations will be taken into account when reaching that decision.
Bobby Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say I'm exasperated by the government's response to this urgent question today. They are treating this development as a mere wrinkle in a bureaucratic planning matter, and that is simply not the case. If this embassy was granted, it will represent one of the largest, most prestigious embassies held by any country in Europe, and that has huge diplomatic consequences. So can the Minister reassure us that it's not merely planning considerations that are being taken into account, but those of national security and diplomatic importance as well?
Minister.
All material considerations will be taken into account. They include matters of national security, but the decision is being taken by my department in line with statutory provisions governing planning decisions and published propriety guidance. The full reasons for the decision, as I've said, will be set out in the published decision letter. But as I continue to say, Mr. Speaker, no decision has yet been made.
Lynn Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the limitations in which the Minister on what he can and cannot say, but in light of the publication of the unredacted Chinese embassy plans, just to ask the Minister, will Government and Security Services look again as to whether it would be appropriate to allow the embassy to proceed?
Minister.
Well, I'm not going to comment, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the security services. I'm not going to do it. Chuntering from a sedentary position, it is not appropriate for me to comment on behalf of the security services. But as I've continued to say, all material considerations can be taken into account. I'm here answering the question on the Chinese embassy, which is a decision for my department and planning ministers within it.
Sir Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister's talked about this being a planning decision, but essentially it's a political judgment. And I think many people here want to strongly represent to the government and the National Security Advisor that this judgment call on getting a closer relationship with China and this embassy on this massive site, I went round it the last couple of days, Mansell Street is really restricted, it's going to be completely impossible to monitor what's going on there, that judgment is wrong.
Minister.
I note his concerns, and the National Security Minister and other ministers will have heard them too. But the case is specifically a planning decision to be made in accordance with the propriety rules and other considerations that planning ministers, as part of that quasi-judicial process, have to take into account. But all material considerations will be taken into account as part of that process.
Mark Seawood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I represent Chloe Chung from my constituency, and she has to live with the fact that she has a £100,000 bounty placed on her head under the national security law in Hong Kong. She walks around every day knowing that anyone here could claim that bounty by taking her to the Chinese embassy and handing her over to the authorities. And now she worries that she might find herself locked away in one of the secret rooms in the new embassy plans. What exactly is the government going to do to ensure that Chloe is protected and kept safe, and that this never happens to her or anyone else who has a £100,000 bounty placed on her head, if the new embassy is approved?
Minister.
Well, I recognise, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend's frustration, his anger on behalf of his constituents. We won't tolerate transnational repression of the kind he is concerned about. But what I would say specifically, the counterfactual here is not that the Chinese don't have an embassy. They have 7 diplomatic premises in the UK already. But again, I come back to the fact that we will make a decision on this case on the material planning considerations that pertain to it.
Bruce Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, every single day people from the Tibetan, Hong Kong, Uyghur and Falun Gong communities here in the UK already face intimidation from transnational repression. Their activities are under constant surveillance. Their families living under Chinese rule face arrest and prosecution. There's million-dollar bounties placed upon them, and their neighbours in the UK are encouraged to pass on information or deliver them to the Chinese authorities. So given the increased threat to their safety that this mega embassy poses, what action is the government taking to counter these actions, and what message does the government have for these communities?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. We have reviewed transnational repression through the Defending Democracy Task Force. We take it incredibly seriously. I've noted his concerns. I'm here on behalf of my department as the Housing and Planning Minister to make clear what the process is for making a decision on this embassy application.
Let you do it. James Dish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This debate on the mega embassy isn't just about a building and 208 secret rooms. It's primarily about national security and the safety of those from the Hong Konger, Chinese, Uyghur and Tibetan diasporas in the UK, approximately 700,000 people. We've learned that in 2018, the then UK Prime Minister committed to no delays in granting permission for the mega embassy, which has an air of predetermination. So can I ask the Minister what reassurances he can give me and this House that that opinion hasn't compromised the independence of the planning process?
Minister.
The planning process hasn't been compromised. We will make a planning decision on the basis of the relevant propriety guidance. What I'd say to him about the delays that have taken place, given the detailed nature of the representations that have been provided, the need to give parties sufficient opportunity to respond, we've considered that more time was needed for full consideration of the applications. A variation to the timetable is routine when more time is needed for determination, such as when it is necessary to consider that additional information. But as I've made clear, our intention is to make a decision on or before the 20th of January this month.
Sir Desmond Swain.
July, a British subject's sentencing hearings are taking place. China has abrogated every agreement it made with us over Hong Kong. Yep. What outrage would China have to commit for us to deny any demand that they made? The Minister said he could not distill our relationship into China down to one word. Oh, yes, we can. It's a very big word, Mr. Speaker. It's no.
Yeah. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the UK condemns the politically motivated prosecution of Jimmy Lai. No state can bully and persecute the British people for exercising their basic rights. Following the court verdict, the Foreign Office summoned the Chinese ambassador to underline our position in the strongest terms, and we call again for Jimmy Lai's immediate release.
Christine Jordan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is very artfully avoiding answering the question which my constituents in Edinburgh West, Hong Kong Chinese, Muslims, Tibetans, all over this country want to know, and it's not about the planning process. They are concerned about their safety, about the security, and that the redacted photographs show just how close a foreign country is to critical communications cables. That is their concern, that they want to know that they are safe and that this government is taking that into account. That is the question we want to ask. Please don't tell me about the planning process.
Minister.
With all due respect to the Honourable Lady, this is an urgent question in relation to plans that are part of a planning process. Now, I understand her frustration, but it was precisely to secure the information in question that a reference back was made to the parties on the 6th of August, and her constituents, Mr. Speaker, can be reassured that all material considerations will be taken into account by the relevant minister when a decision is made on this case.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure Tower Hamlets building control are very good, but they're not security experts. If this plan goes ahead, and I very much hope it doesn't, will the Minister at least assure the House that the agencies will be fully involved in monitoring the demolition of this wall along Mansell Street and round Wapping Exchange, and that the replacement too is monitored closely to ensure that our critical national infrastructure is safeguarded?
Minister.
I note the honourable gentleman's question. We don't comment, for obvious reasons, on intelligence matters. I can assure him that national security concerns will be taken into account. All the representations that have been made along those lines will be taken into account as part of the decision-making process. He says that Tower Hamlets don't have the relevant expertise to make the decision in the round. That's precisely why an independent public inquiry is held by an independent public inspector, the report passed to government, and the chance for government to seek further information through a reference back, as we have done on the 6th of August, so that the relevant planning minister in my department can take the decision on the basis of all the required information.
Paul Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister asked for a planning question, so I'll give him a planning question. I'm struggling to think of an innocent reason why the important details will be redacted from the original application. So can the Minister tell me what explanation has been given for those redactions?
Yeah. Well, as I've said, Mr. Speaker, it was precisely because the department did not feel it had all the necessary information to make a decision that we sought that further information via a reference back letter to parties. And as I continue to say, all material considerations will be taken into account when a decision is made.
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To make the same mistake repeatedly is a form of stupidity. And as a country, we keep doing the same thing. So if we cast our mind back to the debacle with Huawei, we let the Chinese Communist Party essentially into our 5G network. We didn't listen to our national security advice, and we stopped and we pulled back. We've done the exact same with civil nuclear. We are making the same mistake again. So at what point does the Minister, who has responsibility for this, he can step in, he can pull the plug on this, at what point do they wake up and realise that we are just making the same mistake again?
Minister.
Planning ministers will make a decision taking into account all material planning considerations.
Lockhart.
Mr. Speaker, the proposed Chinese embassy includes a subterranean facility just centimetres from cables carrying highly sensitive financial data. Any hostile intelligence service designing an espionage target would struggle to find a better location. Northern Ireland has learned that strategic assets must not be put at unnecessary risk for the sake of diplomatic symbolism. National security cannot be an afterthought. At a time when this House voices concerns about foreign influence online, we must also confront the real-world threat of hostile states exploiting our critical infrastructure. Will the Minister do the right thing and agree that national security should trump planning and therefore say no to this?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, I simply can't provide a running commentary on what is a live case, but I can assure all honourable members that national security is the first duty of government generally, and that all relevant planning considerations will be taken into account when making a decision on this case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has recognised that China poses significant threats, and yet this government is prepared to welcome this Trojan horse of an embassy in the heart of our city, so close to the link system. Now, he talks about material planning considerations, but that means balancing developing needs with community impact, ensuring the development aligns with local and national policies, and site-specific details like heritage, like the father of the house mentioned. Not one contribution in this House can say that this isn't a threat to national security and that this is in any way a good and solid planning application. So how can this government be so naive to accept it?
Minister. No decision has been made on this case.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I first of all thank the honourable member for Rutland and Stamford for submitting this question, but also, Mr. Speaker, for granting another question on this issue. I do feel that whilst we're not happy with the answers yet, we have at least been given repeated chances to scrutinise it as it's progressed. So I'm here on behalf of Hong Kongers in Sutton Cheam and across London who are aghast at the prospect of this project being given permission. We've seen the persecution and conviction of Jimmy Lai, transnational repression of Hong Kongers in the UK, by, amongst other things, the withholding of their mandatory Provident Fund savings, which allow them to survive here, bounties placed on activists, action against MPs, such as my honourable friend, the member for Bath, being stopped going into Hong Kong, and sanctions put on other MPs. If all these actions are rewarded by a hostile state being given permission to expand and increase their capabilities for surveillance, espionage and repression in our capital city, what hope can any of us have that the government will stand up against hostile states for Britain and Britons in an increasingly hostile and dangerous world?
Minister. Well, I simply note, Mr. Speaker, that all the points the honourable gentleman made could apply to the existing 7 diplomatic premises in the UK. When it comes to this site, as I've said, a decision will be made on or before the 20th of January. All material considerations will be taken into account. We remain steadfast in our support for the Hong Kong community in the UK. As I've said in answer to a previous question, we've undertaken a review of transnational repression as part of the Defending Democracy Task Force. We take it incredibly seriously.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For the thousands of B&O people in my constituency of Solihull West and Shirley, the prospect of the Chinese super embassy is deeply, deeply worrying. This is compounded by the fact of these unredacted plans. With that in mind, can the Minister confirm whether any government minister has called in the Chinese ambassador to discuss these issues? And if they haven't, why haven't they?
I'm afraid to say to the gentleman, I cannot provide a running commentary on what is a live case. All material considerations will be taken into account when making a decision.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a complete farce, to be quite honest. We've seen these reports in the media that there will be a secret room less than 1 metre away from sensitive cabling. There's reports that since 2018 in China, the Chinese authorities have been cutting off utilities to the UK embassy there. National security should surely trump the planning system. This is a decision that should be taken by the Prime Minister in Downing Street. It should be a very quick and resolute no. And if the government is not in a position where it's able to do that, the framework needs to be changed. If necessary, the government needs to come before Parliament to do that, where they will find a very warm reception.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think I could have been any clearer. All national security considerations will be taken into account when making a decision on this case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll offer the government some advice, and it's one word, and that is common sense. Common sense in the interest, well, you know, 2 words. But given the interest in national security, I'm quite surprised, really, that a planning minister is here to talk about this, because it's intertwined. So to rebut from other members about, oh, that's a security issue and it's not your portfolio, then I'll retract that. But given what we know, will the Minister review the proximity of other countries' embassies in to major underground fibre optic cables? Because this is a big worry for the country's intelligence services and also a big worry for many constituents throughout the country.
Minister.
I note the concerns the honourable gentleman raises, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate his frustration, but it is ultimately a planning case that a decision is being made on. But as I've said repeatedly to honourable members, all material considerations will be taken into account when reaching a decision on that case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. London is a critical global financial centre. We all rely on it. All of our constituents rely on it. Does the Minister recognise the very serious risk that this Chinese super embassy, if passed, could pave the way for economic war, as my honourable friend, the Shadow Minister, said, not just on our country, but on the Western world, including by undermining the security of critical data travelling under the site to and from the City of London?
Minister.
What I would say to the honourable gentleman, as I've said to other honourable members, is that all national security considerations will be taken into account. He can be reassured on that fact.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whatever statements have been made publicly, the unredacted plans for this super embassy will have our security services filled with dread, as well they should. Chinese Communist Party is not a friend to the United Kingdom. And nowhere is that more evident than consistent espionage, including on this very estate, and frequent cyber attacks against national infrastructure. Can the Minister tell the House, given that his department is responsible for this final decision, if he will do the right thing by national security and pull the plug?
Minister.
Well, I'm not going to comment on specific considerations that will be taken into account. I've been very clear, Mr. Speaker, that we will continue to develop a consistent and pragmatic approach to the China People's Republic. On economic engagement, we won't compromise our national security. I've been very clear that China poses a series of threats to UK national security, and as I've been as clear as I can be, national security considerations, along with all other material planning considerations, will be taken into account when reaching a decision, and it's for planning ministers to reach that decision, as I've said, on or before the 20th of January.
Objected.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We seem to be here every 3 weeks to address espionage and security concerns with regards to China, be it spying, hacking, the government's failure to add them to the enhanced tier of furs. China is not an ally and features as a security threat in our own security strategy. The Chinese have previously stated that they wouldn't resubmit their application after it was rejected unless they were given assurances it would be approved. To that end, what assurances have been given to China? What are we expecting as a quid pro quo with regards to the rebuilding of our own embassy in Beijing? And what concerns have been raised by our Five Eyes partners, specifically the US?
Minister.
I appreciate why the honourable gentleman is tempting me on the matter, but as I've been very clear, it would be completely inappropriate of me to comment from this dispatch box on national security considerations in respect of this live case. On the specific question he asked about whether China has been given a commitment that permission will be granted, this decision is being taken by my department in line with statutory provisions governing planning decisions and published propriety guidance. But as I keep saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, no decision has yet been made on the case.
Jim Allister.
Why is this government so evidently in awe of the Chinese government and its requirements? And is one of those requirements that this mega embassy is approved before the Prime Minister visits Beijing?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I simply don't accept that characterisation of the government's approach to China. We've got to take a consistent and pragmatic approach, but we recognise that it poses a series of threats. But as I've said, no decision has yet been made on this case, and all material planning considerations will be taken into account when one is.
Joshua Reynolds.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've raised the harassment of constituent of mine, Carmen Lau, by the Chinese authorities with the government multiple times. Bounty letters, deepfake pornography, her family interrogated by national security agents in Hong Kong. And every time I am told that the safety of Hong Kongers is the utmost importance to the government. So, given that, will the Minister accept that to approve this application, whilst China is still committing transnational oppression, will be a kick in the teeth to Hong Kongers such as Carmen.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the safety of Hong Kongers is of the utmost importance to this government, and we remain steadfast in our support for the Hong Kong community in the UK. I understand why the honourable gentleman is asking me, but I can't comment on what is a live planning case before planning ministers in my department.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's no coincidence that a week ago in a Protestant church in Chengdu, Sichuan province in China, was raided by Chinese authorities. The pastor was arrested, the elders were arrested, those who attended the church were arrested. So at the same time, what are we doing here? What is government doing here? The facts have revealed in those plans do show the potential for risk that must be explored. By all means, the Chinese should have a consulate to enable their citizens to have consular help, but not one that seems so elevated that it poses a threat to national security. The planning question is whether abasement is a real requirement of a functioning consulate, and will the Minister show and prove that national security will always be the priority?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I recognise his long-standing and passionate advocacy for people across the world to be able to practice their faith freely. What I would say in relation to the planning applications in front of us is that all the relevant inquiry information was submitted as part of that independent public inquiry. This department, at the point that the inspector handed us a report, sought that further information, specifically in relation to those redacted plans, so that we are able to take a decision taking into account all material planning considerations in this case, and we'll issue that decision, as I've said, on or before the 20th of January, Madam.
Point of order, Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was hoping to ask this point of order of Mr. Speaker because it's a little difficult for you not having been here for most of the urgent question. But at the start of the urgent question, Mr. Speaker made it clear that he was surprised that a minister was being put up who would not be able to answer questions, being a planning minister, rather than a security minister being put up who would be able to answer questions. In my 28 years in this House, I've attended many ministerial statements and the questioning that follows, and many urgent questions since they were introduced. Never before has there been an occasion that I have seen where every question asked on both sides of the House was deeply hostile, as it was today, about what the government was proposing to do. So my question is, if my honourable friend for Rutland and Stamford were to reapply to Mr. Speaker for a similar urgent question in anticipation that an appropriate minister, a security minister, will be put up to answer it, would that be within the rules of parliamentary order and practice?
Point of order, Alicia Cairns. I'm assuming it's on a very similar subject.
It is indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. With due respect to the Minister, I submitted this urgent question as the Shadow National Security Minister to the Home Office for the Security Minister to answer. How do we in this House get answers on the focus that we have? Because all questions bar two were on national security in this chamber, not on planning. And when, particularly, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the more than capable and diligent Security Minister is forced to sit on those benches silent while his colleague attempts to answer those questions that should be being allowed to be put to him.
Can I thank both Right Honourable and Honourable members for their points of order? As they will know, and the Right Honourable gentleman made a very salient point of his long-standing experience in the House. The choice of minister and responding department is a matter for the government, not for the chair. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, and I are rightly frustrated and understand the frustrations that members have. The government front bench has heard those concerns and might reflect upon it. Of course, the Honourable Lady is perfectly free, as is every member, to resubmit an urgent question on this matter, but obviously I cannot comment on whether that will be granted or not. That will be a matter for Mr. Speaker. Which brings us to the next urgent question. I will allow a couple of moments for the front benches to swap over. you ever so much. Thank you. Which brings us to an urgent question on Storm Goretti. Andrew George.
Madam Deputy Speaker, to ask the Minister in the Cabinet Office if he will make a statement following Storm Goretti.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and can I express my deepest condolences to the family and the friends of the man who tragically lost his life in Cornwall during Storm Goretti. Last week, the Met Office issued a red weather warning for wind covering south east England, with wider parts of the UK covered by amber and yellow warnings for wind, snow and rain. As is normal when these alerts are issued, the government took action to ensure the necessary preparations for the arrival of the storm were in place. In view of the potential threat to life, to Cornwall and to St Ives specifically, the Cabinet Office issued 2 emergency alerts to approximately 500,000 people on the Isles of Scilly and in Cornwall, both of whom were under a red weather warning, urging them to stay indoors during the severe winds. Storm Goretti caused disruption across the UK. However, some of its most significant impacts were felt in the southwest. The storm saw a peak gust of 99 miles per hour on the Isles of Scilly and was the worst windstorm in parts of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly for 30 years. The storm damaged infrastructure, resulting in impacts on transport, power and telecom sectors, particularly impacting rural communities in the southwest. Over 250,000 customers lost power during the storm. This morning, 193 customers remain without power in the southwest as a result of Storm Goretti, with 82 identified as vulnerable customers who continue to be offered support by local authorities. Industry expects all remaining customers will have their power restored by later this afternoon. While reconnections are continuing at pace, I am aware that a small number of customers have been off supply for an extended period. These are in some of the hardest to reach parts of the network in remote rural areas. My right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, remains in close contact with National Grid Electricity Distribution on the progress of restoration and to ensure remaining supplies are reconnected as soon as possible. Support is being provided to vulnerable customers by local authorities whilst power supply is restored, and yesterday the National Grid Electricity Distribution deployed 900 engineers and field staff across the southwest to further support restoration efforts and reconnect those without power as soon as possible. Overall, the response to the storm has been managed effectively and the local response mechanisms have worked well. This is a testament to the work of the Local Resilience Forum, which include emergency responders and utility workers, as well as the local communities who've pulled together to work so hard in difficult conditions in order to keep people safe. Madam Deputy Speaker, during these periods of disruption and damage for so many, it is ordinary people looking out for their neighbours and those most vulnerable who help us recover and repair and begin to get back to normal life. I am sure that the whole House will join me in paying tribute to those communities and commit to doing all we can to support them now and when severe weather hits again.
Andrew George.
To the Minister for his reply, and he's described the impact that it's had on our communities. As he rightly says, the West Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly took the brunt of the storm, but it nevertheless had a devastating effect throughout Cornwall and indeed in southwest England and beyond. I mean, nursing home patients were evacuated at haste. Homes were without power for many days, and thousands of vulnerable people were isolated and still are, I have to say. Many residents in my constituency observed that if this same level of destruction, service outrage, loss of life had happened in London and the home counties, they believed that the national media would have given it high headline billing for days, and the government would have declared a national emergency. Of course, frontline workers have been amazing. And indeed, communities have come together incredibly well. However, in spite of the Minister's optimism, I discovered that utility companies' reports of figures home reconnected to be unreliable. And indeed, I also discovered that we have now a society which is now more reliant on these utilities and services, and now less resilient, because many places affected by these outrages have not been able to communicate because all power, broadband, mobile signal had been cut. And of course, higher authorities have decided to turn off the analogue signals some time ago. It has actually meant that people in vulnerable positions have not been able to communicate their vulnerability. And that, I think, is a very serious matter, particularly people who are traumatised and isolated. Service providers have told people to phone or follow advice on their website or just click the app. How can they do that if they're completely cut off? So therefore, I must ask the Minister, why has the government not considered or viewed this a national emergency? What additional support will the government provide beyond the compensation utility providers are obliged to provide? Will the government review the Bellwyn funding formula, which seems designed not to help very small authorities like the Isles of Scilly, nor very large ones like Cornwall? And finally, will the government agree to review the resilience of systems which provide a means of communicating in circumstances like this? Thank you, Madam.
Before I call the Minister, I would just like to make it very clear to members that I intend to prioritise those areas of the country most affected by Storm Goretti. This may be a test of my geography. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I say to the honourable member that I very much appreciate the reasonable and diligent way in which he's made his points. He's absolutely right to come here to represent his constituents, and he's done that very effectively. Whilst he will understand, it isn't for me to take a view about the way in which these matters are portrayed by the national media. I can give him an absolute categoric assurance that the government cares just as deeply about his constituents in Cornwall as we do about residents right around the country. And I personally know Cornwall incredibly well. I think it is an extremely important part of the United Kingdom. And I represent a constituency that also feels it's a long way away from the centre, and often feels that it's neglected, and often feels that other parts of the country will get preferential treatment. So I can say to him and other honourable members from the county of Cornwall that we take the points that they're raising today very seriously, and I give him an assurance that government departments, agencies and local partners have and will continue to work very closely together to ensure that Cornwall has the same emergency support, recovery funding and resilience measures that would be available to other parts of the country, including those parts of the country that he mentioned. Now, let me give him a bit more detail about that, because this includes support for affected households and for businesses, and the very important issue of the coordinating activity that takes place with local authorities, as well as important engagement with utility providers and the emergency services to ensure that collectively we are working together to get services restored as quickly as possible. Now, we do fully recognise the particular vulnerabilities of coastal and rural communities, like the one that the Honourable Gentleman represents, and that the disruption and that severe weather will inevitably cause a significant amount of disruption to infrastructure and to livelihoods in areas such as Cornwall under the conditions that we've seen over the past few days. But the government remains absolutely committed to standing alongside Cornwall as the recovery effort continues, and to ensuring that no community in Cornwall or anywhere else in the United Kingdom for that matter feels overlooked or treated differently because of where it is located. Now, I do recognise the impacts of severe weather like Storm Goretti, that they're hugely disruptive and distressing for those who've been affected. And of course, this can feel even more acute for vulnerable individuals and those in more remote communities who can feel isolated from support. The government took the decision to deploy an emergency alert following the Met Office red weather warning. I was there in the Situation Room when we took that decision, and we issued that alert. And we did that to ensure that all communities across Cornwall and in St Ives, the Honourable Gentleman's constituency, were aware of the incoming storm and could take the necessary precautions to stay safe. Now, I'm pleased to see that communities have been coming together to respond to the impacts of the storm, and I do want to take the opportunity, and I know that the Honourable Member will join with me in doing that, in commending the tireless work of network operators to reconnect the remaining properties with power. For the final 193 customers, power restoration is challenging, as repairs may be required at individual properties in remote locations, and access to these properties may be blocked still by fallen trees or by debris. Now, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, I'm very pleased to see that Minister of State is here for this response, are continuing to work closely with the National Grid to deploy generators to individual properties while repairs take place. This is in addition to the point I mentioned earlier, to the further 900 engineers and field staff that were deployed yesterday. Vulnerable people are being supported and have been offered alternative accommodation, transportation, support and hot food. I can give the Honourable Member and the House an assurance that the Cabinet Office continues to work closely with DESNES, MHCLG and with DEFRA to ensure that the recovery efforts are progressing.
Order. I very much appreciate, as I'm sure Cornish members do, the Minister's comprehensive response to that urgent question. It was twice the length of his initial response, and perhaps answers could be slightly shorter. Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank members of the emergency services and the utilities and the volunteers and everyone across Cornwall who's looked after their neighbours and responded so brilliantly to what was a storm that tested the resilience of rural and coastal Britain to the hilt and exposed vulnerabilities in our infrastructure and our emergency planning that could affect any part of the country. Now, the Honourable Member has mentioned communications technology that proved unreliable after the shift from digital to analogue. That failed without power, leaving people completely cut off. I would ask that this could be taken into account for future backup with communications, maybe satellite, using satellite and moving more quickly to that. The priority response services for vulnerable people also rely on sign-up and rely on being able to contact those people. So again, could the Minister please agree to look at this when it comes to future incidents, because the climate is changing. This storm was incredibly ferocious and terrifying, but there are likely to be more like it.
Well, I'm extremely mindful of your earlier guidance, Madam Deputy Speaker, with regard to brevity. I hope the House will understand I was just seeking to convey the seriousness with which the government take these issues. The Honourable Lady, she does make an important point about telecoms, and I absolutely give her the assurance that we'll look carefully at this. As I know will the local resilience forums. Having discussed the matter with colleagues in MHCLG earlier today, I know that there is a process in place where local resilience forums will conduct both a hot debrief and then subsequently a cold debrief to look very carefully at what's happened and what lessons can be learned from it. But I think the Honourable Lady makes an important point, and of course we'll look carefully at it.
Shadow Minister Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I join the Minister in thanking the emergency services, the local authorities and Environment Agency staff and volunteers who worked tirelessly to recover from the storm and to keep the public safe, and in sending our condolences to those families who are grieving and whose lives have been upended by the storm. Given the severity of this and previous extreme weather events, can the Minister outline what further preparations the Government will make for future storms and for adverse weather? Does the Government plan to carry out further storm preparedness exercises and to implement lessons learned from the previous test of the emergency alert system in response to these extreme weather events? Can the Minister confirm what further discussions the Government has had internally and with local authorities, utility providers and emergency services to coordinate the continued response to this storm? And does the Minister agree that the latest mass power outages in the South West show why the Government should reconsider its drive for more electricity pylons and instead back faster undergrounding of cables, and particularly in high wind zones? As the Honourable Lady said, many people reported that when the power failed, mobile signal followed shortly after. So what is the Government doing to ensure the telecommunications masts have sufficient battery or generator backup to remain operative during 48 or 72-hour storm cycles? And what assessment has the Minister made of the implementation and the operation of the severe weather emergency protocol to support the most vulnerable, and particularly those sleeping rough in rural areas like Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly? Storm Goretti has led to significant rainfall across many parts of the country. So can the Minister confirm what assessment the Government has made of localised flooding and whether support will be made available for those affected by Storm Goretti through the Flood Recovery Network? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand the Flood Resilience Task Force met on the 8th of September. I would be grateful if the Minister could outline what actions were taken following that meeting on the 8th of September to prepare for eventualities such as this.
Well, I'm grateful to the Shadow Minister for the points that he has raised, and he's absolutely right to recognise the efforts of all of those involved in the operation, both to support local residents and to restore power where it's been lost. I think it is worth making the point where normal people will hunker down under these very difficult conditions. We should collectively pay tribute to those who don't do that, but go out and brave the elements in order to restore power and provide support to those residents who need it. I thought the Honourable Member made some good points about the importance of looking very carefully at these matters and ensuring that government is properly prepared for future incidences. I've already looked quite carefully at the way in which there was a response to Storm Arwen a number of years ago, and I think the government can learn quite a lot from that particular response, and I will ensure, through the Cabinet Office, working with colleagues across government, that we look very carefully at the response to this recent storm and ensure that we are drawing lessons out of it so that as a country we can be as resilient and as best prepared for future challenges that undoubtedly we will face. The Shadow Minister specifically raised the issue of telecoms, and whilst I know that he will understand that telecoms equipment is usually highly resilient and major outages are extremely rare, most telecoms equipment relies on a power supply which of course can be disrupted by severe weather. On the rare occasion that the sector does experience an outage, there are statutory obligations on telecoms providers to maintain the availability of services and report significant outages to Ofcom. But in general terms, I give the Shadow Minister an absolute assurance of the seriousness with which we take these matters. We'll look very carefully at the response and ensure that we draw all of the right lessons from it.
Karen Moon.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, jutting out into the Atlantic, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly have often found themselves in the front line of nationally significant weather events. And predictions, as my honourable friend has just mentioned, are that storms like Goretti will become more and more frequent. And this is a reality that I'm not convinced has been taken seriously enough by consecutive governments. Now, the response from the people of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly before, during and after Storm Goretti has been nothing short of remarkable. But can I urge the Minister to please commit to a comprehensive cross-departmental review of the resilience of essential Cornish and Solonian infrastructure, communications and priority list support?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to him for the point that he has made, which I think is a very good and reasonable one. Let me take the opportunity to reiterate the point I made earlier to the Honourable Gentleman about the Government's commitment to Cornwall. I do absolutely recognise that Cornwall, like many other coastal communities, can feel geographically isolated and a very long way from the centre. The Government understands that, as do I, as the Minister for Resilience. The Honourable Member has made good points about looking in the round, specifically with regard to the resilience of Cornwall. Let me give an assurance that I'm very happy to continue that conversation with him and other colleagues. I'll look carefully at the detail of the point that he's made, and as I say, I'm happy to discuss it further with him.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tim Farron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank my honourable friend for his characteristic passion and energy in defending his communities in St Ives. I also wish to send mine and the Liberal Democrats' collective deep sympathy to the family of the man who lost his life in the storm, and to add my thanks to our amazing emergency services and the frontline utilities staff. The Minister rightly says that it's not up to him or the government how the media covers things. Nevertheless, it's worth bearing in mind that 4 years ago, when Storm Eunice hit London and the South East, hitting 200,000 homes, COBRA was convened 200,000 homes have been hit in the West Country, Cobra not convened. He will understand why people from Cornwall, Caithness, Cumbria feel sometimes a little bit a second afterthought. Does the Minister agree that this storm does expose the frailty of our energy, water, communications infrastructure and the vulnerability of those who rely upon them, especially in this entirely and, dare I say, foolishly post-analogue age? Given that so much land, especially in our rural communities, lies saturated, causing water supply and wastewater crises at the moment, will he ensure that this is reflected in the qualifying criteria for the farming recovery? And does the Minister agree that the damaging impact that flooding has on food security means that the Elms budget should be increased by a minimum of £1 billion a year to underpin that vital resilience?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. He's a proud representative not just of his party but of his part of the world, and I know that he speaks with great authority and experience on these matters. I do want to respond to the point he made specifically about Cobra, because I think that is an entirely fair challenge. I am incredibly keen to ensure that we are using all of the machinery of government to best effect. So I spend quite a lot of my time deciding and considering whether we do need to convene Cobra, whether the set of circumstances that we face that we're responding to requires that level of government response. In truth, Cobra tends to sit when there is concern about the nature of the response. We took the decision last week that because we thought that the response was being conducted in an effective way, there wasn't a requirement to bring ministers together. But I give him an assurance that we think very carefully about these things and keep them under constant review. I thought the right honourable gentleman made a number of other good and useful points with regard to vulnerabilities and flooding. I can give him and others an assurance that we consider these things both specifically and collectively in the round as part of the work that we're doing on resilience. We work very closely with other government departments, including with DEFRA, on them. But should he wish to discuss them further, I'd always be very happy to do that.
Anna Gelderd.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I align myself with the previous comments regarding the tragic loss of life in Cornwall and add my thanks to the local emergency services, utilities companies and local people who've worked tirelessly over the weekend to make sure that arms have been put around our most vulnerable in our community. And with an ageing population, South East Cornwall has many vulnerable residents who rely on consistent power and water. The extended outages during Storm Goretti left families in unmanageable conditions, and storms will only likely increase if we don't tackle climate change. So will the government work with utility companies to prioritise vulnerable households and ensure faster restoration times during severe weather events?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to her for the very important points that she makes, and yes, I can give her those assurances. I mentioned earlier, Madam Deputy Speaker, that currently, and the numbers probably reduced slightly, but that currently there's 193 customers remain without power in the southwest, with 82 identified as being vulnerable customers. Now, working with National Grid Electricity Distribution, vulnerable customers have been supported by local authorities and local resilience forums throughout the incident. This has included the provision of alternative accommodation, battery packs for medical equipment, transportation, warm spaces, crisis packs containing torches, blankets, hand warmers and warm clothes, and a welfare van providing hot food and drinks. I'm also aware that the National Grid Electricity Distribution is exploring the deployment of generators to get customers back on supply as quickly as possible. And finally, I'd like to take the opportunity to say, and I know that the Honourable Lady and others will agree with me, I'm very grateful for the support that the British Red Cross have provided to the most vulnerable customers.
We have to get through business quite quickly as we have the finance bill later on. I urge the Minister to be as quick as he can with his responses, and we're focused on calling colleagues who are incredibly close to where the storm was. So if it was nowhere near you, then please don't bob. David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just want to start by placing on record my thanks to the Met Office, who are based in my constituency of Exmouth and Exeter East, for their sterling work throughout Storm Goretti, and all year round. They have international expertise and they are a real asset to our country. One of the main issues that come up when we have big storms like Goretti is rail in the southwest. Our main line from Paddington was cut off, and many constituents from across the southwest were unable to get home. There are practical solutions put in place, like putting a passing loop into the Waterloo line, and I've raised this directly with the Rail Minister and the Prime Minister, and although I get warm words, no action seems to be taken. So from a Cabinet Office perspective, what more can be done to add resilience to our train infrastructure?
Well, I'm grateful to him, and he makes an important point about the Met Office in his constituency, and I completely agree with that and pay tribute to the vital work that they do. The Honourable Gentleman raises an important point about connectivity. I agree with him. I want our country to be as resilient as we possibly can. And that's why I can say to him that National Rail's winter preparedness regime begins in September of each year. Special trains and equipment are fully checked and any repairs carried out, while contingency plans are reviewed. I give him an assurance that we take these matters seriously. We work closely with colleagues in DFT.
Noah Law.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to put on record my thanks to the emergency services for their work over this long and difficult weekend, and I'd like to thank in particular National Grid for their swift work, at least in my part of Cornwall, for reconnecting people to the grid. However, other infrastructure coming back online has been unacceptably slow. So with many of my constituents still without access to rail, some without access to broadband and their phone lines still, what assurances can the Minister give that he's working with GWR and National Rail to ensure that 4 days after the storm, those closed railway lines can be reopened, and will he reiterate that commitment he made to my honourable friend earlier to work with us to continue to build infrastructure resilience in Cornwall?
Minister.
I'm very grateful to him, and I reiterate the commitment that I gave earlier. He's right to raise these concerns. I want the country to be as resilient and as connected as it possibly can be, and where services are lost, there's an absolute requirement to work at pace to get them restored. I give him the assurances that government will work closely to ensure that that happens, and that I'm very happy to work with him and other honourable members to make sure that it does.
Ben Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my honourable friend for St Ives for securing the urgent question and showing leadership on this crisis in the face of an absence of a response from the government. There's been no Cobra meeting, no declaration of a national emergency. Many of my North Cornwall constituents didn't even receive the emergency alert. And I've got great respect for the Minister, but he doesn't even seem to have the correct amount of households currently without power. The Belwyn scheme activated in emergencies like this reimburses local authorities for its extra costs incurred. But the scheme is unfair for larger authorities like Cornwall Council, which can only apply once it's spent 0.2% of its budget, £1.6 million. If the storm had hit South Hams, for instance, the district council there would only need to spend £260,000. Now that Cornwall Council faces a real terms cut in funding over the next 3 years, will the government commit to emergency financial support for Cornwall Council to assist those drastically affected by this storm?
Minister, short and brief.
I have to say, I'm disappointed that the honourable gentleman made the point that he did at the beginning, which I think is not in keeping with the spirit of this particular debate. I couldn't have been clearer about the seriousness with which this government attaches to these matters. I couldn't have been clearer about the urgency and the pace with which we worked through all of last week and the weekend into this week as well. We take these matters very seriously. We want to work with members right across the House to ensure the best possible response. Where there are lessons to be identified and learned, of course we will take those on board. But the government took this very seriously, and I think in the main the response was a good one.
The Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Suffolk Coastal, obviously on the east of England. Now, we didn't escape the storms by any stretch of the imagination. The coastal erosion in Thorpe Ness has really sped up. We've now got homes facing the worst case scenario, and indeed last night a home was demolished, marking 4 homes that have succumbed to coastal erosion since October, and 3 of those have really been as a consequence of the rapidly eroding shoreline and sped up by the storm. Now, will the Minister arrange to meet with me to discuss a number of issues that are presented, including in particular the Coastal Assistance Grant? One of the homes who will not qualify for that grant may pay £40,000 for the privilege of demolishing their own home. That feels incredibly unfair, and I know East Suffolk Council are working to make sure that doesn't happen, but will the Minister meet with me to talk about this and what can be done to support my community and others affected?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to her for the points that she's raised and concerned to hear about the situation in her constituency. In order to make sure that she gets the best response and support from government, let me confirm whether it is a matter for DEFRA or for the Cabinet Office, but I'll make sure that she gets a meeting with the most appropriate minister.
Minister, like join me and put on record thanks to West Mercia Police, Shropshire Fire and Rescue and West Midlands Ambulance Service and all the local government officers that helped at Telford and Wrekin Council and Shropshire Council. At its peak, 10,000 homes were without power. Currently, there are 200 homes throughout the county of Shropshire, some in my constituency, still without power. Could he urge his officials to press National Grid to do far more and to ensure they're part of the generator scheme. He will know that many trees have fell over many storms over many years in this country, but there was a particular issue with trees falling throughout Shropshire this time, high winds with heavy snow. They blocked the M54 for a large part of it. They blocked the main railway line into Birmingham. So it might seem a minor thing. Could there be a review of the number of chainsaws and people who can operate chainsaws available at Network Rail, at Highways England and in the National Grid?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman made a significant number of very good and constructive points, including one about chainsaws. And I'm told that work has taken place to look at the number of chainsaws. So the government are looking at that, working with partners. Let me join with him in paying tribute to the organisations that he listed, including West Mercia Police, to the Fire and Rescue Services, and to other local services who have been involved in the recovery effort. They do sterling work. They are the best of us, and I join with him in paying tribute to them. Right Honourable Gentleman always takes the opportunity to raise a number of good and considered points. Let me say to him, I look very carefully at them, and as he knows, I'm always very happy to discuss them with him, as is the Minister of State for Desnes, who was listening intently to what he had to say as well.
Patricia Folkestone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, my own constituency is rather a long way away from Cornwall or the Scilly Isles. However, I do live in a part of the country that is not immune to major storms. And as Chair of the Scottish Affairs Committee, we have undertaken an inquiry into connectivity, particularly in the islands and in the rural areas. It's been reported to us that islanders on the Isle of Tiree, after a recent storm, were actually without any connection to even the 999 services for a matter of 6 days, which is clearly unacceptable and shouldn't be happening anywhere in these islands. But the point that's come out to us already in the early parts of our inquiry is that people want to see resilience. Resilience is difficult when your connectivity is actually very poor to begin with. So can the Minister look into this issue of resilience so that people across the country have some assurance about future activity?
Well, yes, I can give her that assurance, and I can say to her that resilience now sits in my brief. It's something that I take very seriously. I'd be very happy to work with her and colleagues from around the House, including, of course, from Scotland. She's right to make the points about connectivity in the way that she does. We want the country to be as resilient as we possibly can, and we're working at pace to make sure that it is.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Despite the best efforts of people on the ground, during the storm, an entire county in the United Kingdom, namely Caithness, was completely cut off. No road, no rail access, and flying a chopper in that blizzard weather was unthinkable. Now, the House knows how appalled I am that pregnant mums have to make a 200-mile round trip to give birth in Inverness. Frankly, it's a miracle that something horrible didn't happen. So I wonder, can I suggest to the Minister that COBRA should, as a matter of some urgency, formally look at why the Scottish Government was so utterly and appallingly ill-prepared for something that could have become a major disaster.
Well, I'm grateful to him for the points that he's made and the representations of his constituents and his constituency. He will understand that from a UK government perspective, of course, we want to work very closely and cooperatively with the devolved nations right around the country. We want to work closely with the Scottish
Speaker, Storm Goretti had a big impact back home in Newcastle Lyme, made all the worse by the disgraceful response of Staffordshire County Council. I wrote to the County Council on November the 28th, asking what plans were in place to ensure that they were prepared for the bad weather. I was told on December 18th that they were prepared. They were not. Rural communities cut off, schools closed, vulnerable people stuck at home, empty grit bins all over my constituency, and roads left ungritted. So what pressure can the Minister apply, and what guidance can be given to Staffordshire County Council to make sure they get a grip in keeping my community in Newcastle Lyme safe the next time we have such bad weather?
Well, I'm grateful to him. He's right to raise the importance of the roles that councils have to play during challenging circumstances. I know from work that I've done recently with MHCLG that there is a process of review, what I described earlier as the hot review and the cold review, to look very closely at what's happened in a particular set of circumstances. I'm sure there will be opportunities for him as a local member to feed into that process, but I've heard the points that he's made. I'm very happy to discuss them with him further.
Quick questions now. Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was very grateful to receive a phone call from the Honourable Member for Coventry East on Friday afternoon, warning that because of Storm Goretti, Haywards Heath in my Mid-Sussex constituency might be losing its water supply. In the event, it was East Grinstead. They're not getting their water back till tomorrow. So what is the government doing to address the evident frailty in the resilience of our water treatment systems?
Minister.
I'm grateful for her referencing the Honourable Member for Coventry East, who was with me on the front bench very recently. I can give her the assurances that we seek. We work very closely across government, including, of course, with DEFRA, but I'm sure the Honourable Member would be happy to meet with the Honourable Lady should she wish to do so.
Hannah Donegal.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister will be aware that there are a number of places in Sussex and in Kent that are still without water as a result of power outages that occurred during the storm, including in Madam Deputy Speaker's own constituency, people are affected. And what is happening here is that a power supply is interrupted briefly to waterworks. That then means water supply goes off for days, if not longer, which is a really serious interruption for people. The National Risk Register, which the Cabinet Office oversees, currently ranks loss of water supply as the lowest form of risk, 1 out of 5, which I think many of us who have got constituents living without water for days would struggle with. Could the Minister have a look at whether it's ranked correctly in the National Risk Register and what preparations there need to be for major incidents like this?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady makes important points, and I will undertake to look at the point she's made specifically about the risk register. I think she will have heard the comments made by DEFRA Minister in the House yesterday with regard to the water outages in Sussex and Kent. She will know that the government take these matters very seriously, and I know that colleagues in DEFRA are continuing to monitor the situation very closely and are engaging with industry partners.
Yes, Brown-Fuller.
Deputy Speaker, a cargo ship lost a number of shipping containers along the shipping route off the south coast during Storm Goretti. This is the second cargo ship to lose shipping containers in a matter of weeks that are now washing up on the shoreline in my constituency, posing a risk to the public and to the environment. What lessons can the government learn regarding maritime resilience when we have these extreme water events, weather events, which we know are going to keep occurring?
Minister.
Well, I think the Honourable Lady makes an important point, and it will have been heard by ministerial colleagues in a number of different government departments, but I'll make sure that she gets an appropriate response from the appropriate minister.
Mr Jim Shannon, is this question about the Storm Goretti? Jim Shannon.
Asked me, did I get home last Thursday? I got home by the skin of my teeth because the winds were blowing the tail end of the plane. Now, when I got home from London City, many of my constituents didn't get home from Heathrow because all the flights were cancelled by 6:30 or 7 o'clock. That meant that everybody had made it to the airport to get home, but unfortunately didn't. Is it not time for British Airways and other air companies and aerospace companies to ensure that there's pre-warning so people don't make the journeys to the airport whenever they have to return home? And could I ask the Minister this question? With all the lessons that we can all learn from what has happened with Storm Goretti, is it not time to have a coordinated plan coming from Westminster for all of the regions, for Scotland, for Wales, for Northern Ireland? Because, like the Minister said earlier on, they've coordinated and learned things from what Storm Goretti. Perhaps it's time to ensure that we all can learn from it as well. Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Member and particularly pleased that he did make it back to Northern Ireland on Thursday of last week. I know that ministerial colleagues in the Department for Transport will have heard the first point that he made. And in terms of his second point, let me give him assurance that we take matters relating to resilience incredibly seriously and we seek to ensure that it is an effort joined up right across the United Kingdom.
The end of the urgent question on Storm Goretti. I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over.
I'm announcing the following changes to business. The business tomorrow, Wednesday the 14th of January, will now be a general debate on Ukraine. The remaining stages of the Public Office Accountability Bill will now take place on Monday the 19th of January. The business on Thursday the 15th of January will remain unchanged. There will be a general debate on new towns, followed by a general debate on financial support for small businesses and individuals during the COVID-19 pandemic. The subject for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee, and I will announce further business in the usual way on Thursday.
Shadow Leader of the House, Jessie Norman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Leader very much for advance notice of his statement and for the statement that he's made. But I think it should be noted by the House that this, and I'm sure he would agree, is a bit of a mess. This is a bill that was in committee in December. The amendments should have been filed by the government on Wednesday of last week. In fact, they came on Friday, too late for colleagues to be able to address them. Now we've had a sudden rethink, rejig, emergency movement of business into tomorrow, and we know not what is going to happen to the legislation that was and the ping pong that was currently planned for next Monday. Instead, we have the new session on this present bill. Can I ask the Leader if he will explain a little bit about why this has happened, what's gone wrong here, and also explain what is going to happen to the motion and the measures that were being debated on Monday, as per the previous schedule? And finally, can he give this House an assurance that when these matters are brought in front of the House next Monday, the Minister will give a full explanation both as to the ministerial snafu and also as to the substantive issues that have caused it in the first place?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I appreciate the Shadow Leader of the House's comments, not least because we spoke earlier at the earliest opportunity. He will be aware, and the House will be aware, of the importance and the sensitivity of this bill. Now, I recognise that it's not ideal for members when we have to change business at short notice, and last Friday the government did table a series of amendments to further strengthen the provisions in the bill. But we do continue to listen to stakeholders on all sides of the debate to ensure that our amendments strike the careful balance that is required and, when necessary, make changes. For that reason, I decided that we would move the bill from tomorrow until next Monday. I'm not going to provide a running commentary on what those changes might be, but my honourable friend, the Minister, is sitting next to me and has heard what the honourable gentleman has said. We will be tabling amendments, new amendments tomorrow. The government will continue to keep all members updated about this, and then on Monday we will have a full opportunity to debate these important matters.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the statement from the Leader of the House. However, I am a bit concerned that the debate today has been pulled and amendments will be here today. I think watering down the duty of candour, especially for intelligence agencies like MI5 and MI6, is completely unacceptable. The duty of candour is being included in this bill was meant to ensure accountability, to prevent cover-up and to give victims and their families the answers they are entitled to. If this law isn't watertight, if it does not apply to everyone, then it does not deserve to be called the Hillsborough Law. So why is the government pandering to the requests of the security services at the expense of families and the public trust?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the short answer to the last point that my honourable friend made is we're not. She has been a very strong advocate on these matters and a great support for families, and that we do understand the significance of this bill, particularly in the region that she represents, but also wider still. The government is absolutely committed to the duty of candour, and I know that there have been questions about the application of the duty to, for example, the intelligence services. We've been very clear that the duty will apply to the intelligence services, but there is a careful balance that we have to achieve. It's not about the principles of the duty of candour being applied, but how the legislation will apply in practice and having the right national security safeguards in place. This isn't about can we get there in the quickest possible time. No. It is about making sure that we get to the right place and that we do it in the right way.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Bobby Dean.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Leader for his statement. The whole House wants to get this bill right. And if a delay is what's required, then I think the House will support that. And I'm glad the government's had humility to withdraw it, even at this late stage, in order to get it right. But it does It does seem extraordinary that the bill will be withdrawn at this very, very late stage, and it does raise serious concerns about what kind of ongoing engagement there was with key stakeholders up until this moment. So can the leader assure us that what needs to be worked out can be done so meaningfully in less than a week? And can they commit that the government will deliver the Hillsborough Bill as previously promised, and not just a Hillsborough Bill in name only?
Leader of the House.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do appreciate the way in which the honourable gentleman has approached this and the understanding here. But in thanking him for that understanding, there has been extensive debate on these matters, and I'm really grateful to everyone who's actually taken part in that. And that is an ongoing situation, but it is important that we do, as I said before, get it right. It will be a meaningful bill that we set out to achieve, but the fact that we're not going to be, it's not in the interest of the bill to try and resolve the next stage of this by tomorrow is precisely the reason why I've decided to move it until the beginning of next week to give that bit extra time.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure my right honourable friend shares my concerns that families, including my constituents who have been repeatedly failed by the state, had arranged time off work, booked travel and expensive accommodation to make the journey to London, only to be told that there will be now no debate tomorrow. It is of course welcome that the government are listening, but please can he use his good offices to ensure that before we reach such critical points in legislation, the government listens sooner to MPs, their constituents and campaigners to avoid such upheaval.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I give my honourable friend the assurance that these are not decisions that we have taken lightly. And of course we try, which is why it's come even at this relatively late stage, which is why we try to ensure that any issues are resolved before they come before this House. I'm sorry that my honourable friends' constituents have already made travel arrangements. I hope that they can be altered in a suitable way. I do understand that the meeting with the Prime Minister that they requested will continue to take place tomorrow, but I'm sure they will take an interest in the debate on Monday when we get to that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I understand completely the government will want to move business around under the circumstances they're under. However, could the leader update the House, because the Backbench Business Committee will be meeting this afternoon, on whether we're going to be allocated Thursday the 22nd of January for backbench business debates, because we'll be deciding that hopefully this afternoon, and indeed the 29th of January if it's possible to do so. And from my personal perspective, that means on Monday the 19th, the Lord's amendments to the Holocaust Memorial Bill will not be debated, and that I chaired the all-party parliamentary group for the Holocaust Memorial, so it would be very helpful to know when those amendments will be debated, so we're ready to put the discussion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm not in a position to confirm with the honourable gentleman the 22nd or indeed the 29th, but if I put it a slightly different way, and that also answers his second point about other legislation that was due to be debated on Monday. My aim is to create the minimal amount of disruption, and therefore, while Monday may have shifted and may have changed, it's not my intention to make major changes to what I had already announced about next week. I'm not in a position, as he expects, I'm sure, to say anything about the 29th, but for his committee meeting today, I wouldn't change any plans about their expectations for the 22nd.
Maya.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is an important and historic bill which is about delivering justice for the families affected, and so I think it's perfectly reasonable to ensure we take the time to make sure it is right, and I commend the Minister who is in her place for her tenacity in taking the bill forward. I have a set of amendments to the bill which would extend the scope of the offence of misleading the public to apply to members of this place. Can the Leader confirm that because of moving the bill to Monday, there is now time until Friday for members to add their names to those amendments should they so wish?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can't confirm that not only will the government be tabling amendments tomorrow, but actually there is time for members to table their amendments as well, and therefore I wouldn't discourage members from putting down any amendments that they'd already planned to make.
Morrison.
Deputy Speaker, I appreciate the difficulties around timetabling, but this is no ordinary bill. So important is it to the government that the Prime Minister himself presented the bill at second reading. And given that, does the leader not believe that the House was entitled for something more than the chaos we appear to be seeing over the way that this process is being handled?
Mr. Speaker, I agree absolutely with the honourable gentleman as far as he says this is no ordinary bill, which is why we are taking this important step today to make sure that it has a proper time and there is continued engagement. As for the Prime Minister, he does care deeply about these matters, and he did, as the honourable gentleman confirmed, take part in the earlier deliberations on these matters. But it is his firm view too that it is absolutely important that we get this right, which is why we are making the decision that the best time for the next stage is Monday, rather than risk rushing it, given what else has other discussions would have been had since, rather than risking rushing it tomorrow.
Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have a particular interest in the accountability of public services due to the shocking treatment of some of my constituents by NHS trusts. And I was very pleased to sit on the Bill Committee, which was on the whole very collegiate and very comprehensive. So I welcome the statement from the Leader of the House that we will be getting this bill right. But can he assure me that there will be minimal impact on the implementation of this bill, notwithstanding, of course, it has to go to the other place?
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to do that. I do accept that, thankfully, there has been a collegiate approach on these matters, and I hope that that can continue, even if the debates will be on a different day. But I can confirm that there is no great plan to change other than the date at which we take this, instead of tomorrow taking it on Monday.
Present a bill to strip Peter Mandelson of his peerage and kick him out of the House of Lords for continuing his friendship with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Since tomorrow afternoon is now legislation free, will the government please schedule the second reading of my bill tomorrow afternoon in order that we can kick Peter Mandelson and all of those who are pals with convicted sex offenders out of the House of Lords as soon as possible?
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I commend the honourable lady on her ingenuity into weaving into these matters something entirely unrelated. This is a statement on a very specific change to business, and I shouldn't. I should tell her that we do have important plans for tomorrow. There will be a debate on Ukraine. There have been a number of opportunities from members to ask for that debate, and the government now has the opportunity to grant that.
David Baines.
The Hillsborough law has been a long time coming. It's been a journey, and for the families of the victims, survivors, and indeed all those affected by lots of other tragedies and disasters over the years, it's been too long a journey and too long coming. Can the Leader of the House please assure me and my constituents that this change is about getting it right, which is one thing I think everyone involved can agree on. We need to get it right, and not about watering it down in any way.
Yeah. I agree, absolutely. I'm able to confirm absolutely to my honourable friend that is the purpose of the change. It is to get it right. There is no watering down of this bill. It is about getting it right. The only difference is we need a slightly longer time period in order to do that, to make sure that when the bill comes out, it commands support and does justice for those who have campaigned on these matters for such a long time.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the existential importance of the subject of Ukraine, and presuming that the Prime Minister will be in the House tomorrow to answer Prime Minister's questions, will he be staying on to lead tomorrow's debate, as would seem to be appropriate? And could he also explain what's happening to the Chagos bill? Because there was a motion for regret yesterday.
Understood. Leader.
Deputy Speaker, I can't confirm who will be leading the Ukraine debate tomorrow, but I've just said a moment ago that the Prime Minister will be meeting the families tomorrow, so I'm not... I think that will probably answer that part of the Right Honourable Gentleman's question. In terms of the Chagos legislation, that was scheduled for next week. And as I've said, I'm expecting minimal disruption. I'm hoping for minimal disruption, intending minimal disruption. So it won't be very long. It won't be Monday, but it won't be very long after that when we can get onto that important matter.
Chris Vance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Leader for his statement. And while I'm here, can I thank the Victims Minister for incredibly hard work on this issue. The Public Office Accountability Bill is hugely important, so I understand why the Leader has taken this decision. Can the Leader confirm to the House that although any changes that are made to this legislation will be thoroughly consulted with the families of those that were tragically lost in the Hillsborough disaster? And will he also confirm that we will continue to make sure that we reach out to the victims and their families when we look at dealing with legislation like this in the future?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can confirm that the Government and Ministers do continue to speak with stakeholders, particularly, obviously, the families. I think there's been a great deal of effort put into that, both by my honourable friends on the backbenches, but also ministers too. I commend them for that, but if there are lessons to be learned, then we will learn those lessons, and such is the progress of legislation. Therefore, for future bills, if there are lessons to be learned, I'm sure we'll have learned them.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now the Chagos bill has been dropped from the order paper on January the 19th. Could you please confirm when the consideration of the Lord's amendments will be scheduled?
Madam Deputy Speaker, they may have been dropped for January the 19th, but they have not been dropped. As I've just said to the right honourable gentleman, my intention is for minimal disruption. Minimal disruption. So if it's not the 19th, the honourable gentleman might want to think what might come shortly afterwards. I will confirm the business on Thursday as usual. If he is in his place on Thursday, he will hear first hand.
Final question, Sir Desmond Swain.
Given that the very welcome intervention by the UN Human Rights Council has arrived subsequent to our own deliberations on the Chagos bill, can I urge the Leader not to be so hasty and to consider pulling the bill entirely?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Government is not going to be tempted down that track, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I'm sure he will, when the bill comes before the House again, which will be soon, then I'm sure he will want to, if he can, catch your eye and make the points that he has just started there. Thank you.
The end of the business statements. I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over as we prepare for our second statement. The second statement on Iran. Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With permission, I want to update the House on the disturbing unfolding developments in Iran. Horrific reports suggest that potentially thousands of people have been killed and many more arrested in the most brutal and bloody repression against public protest in Iran for at least 13 years. On the 28th of December, protests began on the streets of Iran following a plunge in the value of Iran's currency. Over the following week, the protests grew in scale, intensity and geographic spread. Crowds surged onto the streets from major cities to rural towns. Voices ranging from shopkeepers to university students protesting for change. Instead, they have been met with the most bloody repression. A total internet shutdown instigated by the Iranian regime from the 8th of January, together with restrictions on phone communications, means that the full facts are not yet clear. But I am fearful that the reports that we have seen may underestimate the full scale of the horror as further evidence and testimony reaches the outside world. Videos are still emerging, including of what appear to be protester corpses lined up in body bags outside a hospital in the outskirts of Tehran. The Iranian regime has called for a 3-day period of national mourning, but only for its security forces. No acknowledgement of dead protesters. Instead, the regime peddles its manufactured narrative of foreign manipulation and seeks to portray peaceful protesters as criminals and terrorists, all the while pursuing a brutal and relentless crackdown on its own people. It takes huge bravery to protest and to speak out in the face of this oppression, especially for women who continue to face and endure severe repression in their daily lives. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the United Kingdom condemns in the strongest of terms the horrendous and brutal killing of Iranian protesters, and we demand that the Iranian authorities respect the fundamental rights and freedoms of their citizens. On Friday, the Prime Minister joined with the German Chancellor and the French President in condemnation of this violence and to call for an end to the violence. It is a message that I have also delivered directly to the Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi yesterday, setting out the UK's total abhorrence at the killings, the violence and the repression that we are seeing, urging them to immediately end the violence and change course. And today, as the further reports have come through, the Minister for the Middle East, at my instruction, has summoned the Iranian ambassador to underline the gravity of this moment and to call Iran to answer for the horrific reports that we are hearing. But this latest conduct by the Iranian regime is no aberration. It is no outlier. Rather, it is all too in keeping with the fundamental nature and track record of this regime. Consistent with its previous conduct towards its own people, as we saw during the lethal repression of protesters led by Iranian women, following the death in custody of Mahsa Amini at the hands of Iran's so-called morality police. Or consistent with its destabilising actions towards its neighbours in the region, as we have seen in its backing of terrorist and extremist proxies of Hezbollah, of Hamas, of the Houthis, and militia groups in Iraq and Syria, and from Iran's barrage of missile attacks on Israel. And consistent too with Iran's malign global impact, whether it be in terms of weapons support for Russia against Ukraine or its nuclear programme. And consistent too with Iran's state threats activities on UK soil, posing danger to dissidents, journalists and the Jewish community here in the UK, with more than 20 potentially lethal Iran-backed plots over the last year alone, as tracked through the vital work of the UK's security agencies. So let me set out the action that the government is taking in coordination with allies in response to this consistent threat that the Iranian regime poses to the stability, security and freedom and to the UK national interest. First, on domestic security threats, we will not tolerate any Iran-backed threats on UK soil. In May, 3 Iranian nationals were charged with offences linked to the Iranian regime under the National Security Act in 2023, and I want to thank the police, security and intelligence services for their tireless work to keep us safe. Last year, we placed Iran on the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme to detect, deter and disrupt malign and undeclared efforts to undermine our democracy. We sanctioned the criminal Foxtrot network for the violent threats it posed against Jewish and Israeli targets in Europe on behalf of the Iranian regime. And we have geared up the UK's security infrastructure to better tackle hybrid threats. As Home Secretary, I commissioned the review by the Independent Reviewer of Terrorism Legislation, Jonathan Hall, KC, into what more needed to be done so that we could apply counter-terrorism style powers, including on prescription, to state-backed threats as well. And we announced last year that the government will take forward the recommendations so we can deal with all the UK-based threats that we face. Second, support for British citizens. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first duty of any government is the safety and security of our citizens, and my department is working tirelessly to ensure the safety of British nationals in Iran. I spoke yesterday with the UK's ambassador in Tehran about the vital work that he and the team are doing on the ground, and the FCDO is in contact with the relevant Iranian authorities regarding detained British nationals, and their welfare in Iran remains a priority. We are, of course, deeply concerned that Craig and Lindsay Foreman have been charged with espionage in Iran, and just yesterday, Minister Faulkner met with members of the Foreman family, and we continue to raise this case directly with the Iranian authorities. Third, the coordinated economic and diplomatic pressure on this regime. This government and our predecessors have continually raised human rights violations in Iran through the UN and international forums, including most recently this autumn resolutions calling for an end to the regime's reprisals against women, against journalists and against human rights campaigners. But then in October, alongside our E3 partners, France and Germany, the UK triggered the snapback process, which saw the reinstatement of 6 previously terminated UN sanctions resolutions on Iran. We did so because of the repeated failure by the Iranian regime to comply with its nuclear commitments. On the 1st of October, we updated domestic legislation to reapply extensive sanctions measures contained in these resolutions, also going further by designating 71 individuals and entities in sectors which have links to Iran's nuclear programme. Overall, this government has imposed over 220 Iran sanctions designations since coming into office. And we are backing strong sanctions enforcement. Just last week, the UK provided support to the US's seizure of Bella 1, accused of shadow fleet activities and Iran sanctions breaches. And at the time when the sanctions were reinstated in October, I also urged the Iranian regime, even then, to change their approach, to work with the international community to comply with their obligations. I told them then that it would take time to fully implement the UK's sanctions, and during that window they should start compliance and engagement with the international community and end the deception and obfuscation. They have not done so. Weapons inspectors still have not been given access, and far from changing their approach, we have seen instead a reversion to the most brutal forms of repression on their own streets. As a result, I can confirm the UK will bring forward legislation to implement full and further sanctions and sectoral measures. The UK has already designated key players in Iran's oil, energy, nuclear and financial systems. Further measures will target finance, energy, transport, software and other significant industries which are advancing Iranian nuclear escalation. And we will work further with the EU and other partners to explore what additional measures might now be needed in response to developments. And I also send a message to other countries who have sought to avoid implementing UN sanctions or to undermine the legitimacy of the UN sanctions reinstated following the snapback process, because no one should be supporting the kind of approach the Iranian regime is currently taking, and all member states should be fulfilling their UN obligations on such a grave and serious issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me say something else about the events in recent days. Just as they did in 2022, it's absolutely clear that the Iranian regime are trying to paint these protests as the result of foreign influence and instigation. They're using that accusation to try and whip up opposition to the protests amongst anti-Western Iranians and try to justify their vicious and sickening attacks on the ordinary civilians marching in the streets. These are nothing but lies and propaganda being spread by a desperate regime. They must not be allowed to undermine a genuine grassroots movement, drawing together people from all parts of Iranian society and spreading across multiple cities and regions. And that is why we and other governments across the world are determined not to play into the hands of the regime or to allow our words or actions to be twisted to support their lies and propaganda. And with a functioning embassy on the ground in Tehran and British nationals being held in Iranian jails, we recognise that responsibility, as previous governments have always done. In the last 18 months, we have taken stronger action to tackle Iranian threats at home and abroad than any recent government, and we have done so with broad cross-party support. That must continue. The world is watching Iran, and the UK will continue to confront the regime's lies, to call out its repression, and to take the steps necessary to protect the UK's interests. I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for sight of her statement earlier on. Every day for the last 2 weeks across Iran, we have seen brave and courageous men, women and children standing in defiance of a cruel and barbaric despotic regime which has suppressed lives and freedom for over 5 decades. People are being arrested, attacked and murdered in the streets. It has been reported that over 2,000 people have now been killed in Iran, with one report even suggesting that the real figure is over 12,000, and over 10,000 have been arrested, according to the human rights activists in Iran. Towns have been flooded with soldiers to suppress protests, and hospitals are overwhelmed with the injured and murdered. Thousands upon thousands of Iran's young, like the 23-year-old fashion student Rabina Amini, have been shot, killed, buried by the side of roads as they called for a free Iran. And we've seen reports of executions due to take place for those arrested just days earlier. We cannot let their dreams be buried as we mourn the victims of Tehran's atrocities. These were ordinary Iranians doing extraordinary things, fighting for their freedom. We stand with those brave Iranians, we back their calls for freedom, and we join demands for the regime to end. This is a regime whose cruelty goes beyond the brutality we have seen in recent days. The theocratic terrorists in Iran have for too long threatened regional security, from Hamas to Hezbollah to the Houthis backed by Iran. They have backed Putin's war in Ukraine and China's campaign of repression. They have ignored demands to stop their nuclear weapons programme as they circumvent sanctions. They're holding British nationals, Craig and Lindsay Foreman, in cruel captivity. Iran is a hostile state and a threat to our country, a threat to the Middle East and a threat to the world, and Britain must have the resolve to deal with them. So I ask the Foreign Secretary, where is the government's resolve to stand up to Iran, back those protesting and work to bring about the end of the cruelty of this regime? As Iranian citizens are sacrificing their lives in the fight for their own liberation, what message of hope and reassurance does the Foreign Secretary give to those risking their lives on the streets of Iran each day? What is being done to challenge the Iranian regime over the violence it's conducting? What is her assessment of the numbers killed and injured? It is right that the Iranian ambassador has finally been summoned, but why has this only happened today? Well, the Foreign Secretary says she's spoken on the phone to her counterpart. What was his response? And did she raise with him the Foreman case? And what was his response? The Iranian regime now claims to have the protests under total control. What assessment has the government made of this claim? Britain and this House should stand with those campaigning for a free and democratic future, and if change comes, we should be ready to support this change. Given the statements from President Trump, what discussions have taken place with the US administration over their plans, and are we aligned with the US and our regional partners? Are all scenarios being considered and planned for, including the potential of UK-US military bases to stop brutality of the Iranian regime? And if the regime is being weakened, what assessment has been made of the risk Iran in terms of retaliating and escalating plots to undermine our security here? Madam Deputy Speaker, last year the US and Israel took direct action to protect Western and regional interests from Iran's nuclear threats. The then government refused to give a view at the time on those actions. They sat on the fence in a feeble attempt not to upset its backbench MPs. As people fight dying for their rights and for democracy, this is no time for weakness, and Britain should be robust in cutting off the Iranian regime and removing the funds they rely on. So will the Foreign Secretary state what further direct sanctions, and I know she's touched on some of this, will be placed specifically on the regime, and its key henchmen in particular? Will she confirm that no one from that regime will ever step foot in our country and threaten the security of Britain should they try to flee Iran? Why has it taken so long to implement the reintroduction of sanctions under snapback? And on the IRGC, in opposition, Labour said they would prescribe the IRGC, but they have not done so in government. It is incumbent upon them to share their reasons for not doing so with the House. The Foreign Secretary refers to the report from Jonathan Hall, which she says they will take forward. And of course, that was 8 months ago. So when is this coming? And why was Downing Street briefing yesterday that prescription would not happen? Will they be prescribed? Madam Deputy Speaker, this side of the House will work with the government in the national interest and in the interest of global security and stability to pass legislation and other measures needed to keep us safe from Iran and put maximum pressure on this despotic regime. So a suggestion for the Foreign Secretary: instead of legislating for the £35 billion surrender of Chagos, will she use the time we have in this House to deal with the IRGC and Iran, the regime, and keep us safe, and even use the $35 billion to bolster our defences, because at this critical moment, Britain must do all we can to stand with Iranians fighting for their freedom and to protect them and us from Tehran's threat.
Foreign Secretary. Well, can I say I do agree with the Shadow Foreign Secretary in her condemnation of the brutality and the horrendous actions of the Iranian regime and the threats that it poses. I would say to her, she will know that when she was Home Secretary and when I was Shadow Home Secretary, we strongly supported the national security actions on Iran. In fact, I said specifically that I hope the House will be able to come together to support our national security and defend our democracy. And I would urge the honourable members opposite to see this as the same cross-party approach to defending our national security, but also the regional stability as well, because the scale of the truly brutal and horrendous actions in Iran mean that we should stand together in condemnation of that action and also in the action that we need to take in concert with our allies, including on further sanctions, including on further pressure, immediate pressure on the regime as well. She asked for my assessment on the scale of what is happening. Like her, I have seen the reports that suggest there may have been 2,000 people killed, there may have been more. My fear is that the number will prove to be significantly higher because we are currently getting so little information because of the internet blackout that the regime has instigated, because they are trying to hide what they have done and the consequences of it. And that is why we are also talking to other countries about what can be done swiftly to try to restore some sort of internet access or phones communication to people across Iran as well. She asks about the Formans. I directly raised the Formans directly with the Iranian regime just before Christmas, and we continue to raise this case because it is a huge consular priority for us. And we are too also in close touch, not just with the US, but also with other allies across Europe, across the G7 as well, and looking further at what the sanctions measures are that we need to take. She asked about the snapback. She will know that obviously this had been a running issue for very many years, the non-compliance with the nuclear regime. The previous Conservative government had not taken the snapback action. We did take the snapback action. It was supported on a cross-party basis. I hope again that that will remain so because it was clear that that compliance was not taking place. And that work was done in conjunction not just with the E3, the France and Germany, but also with our US allies, many conversations with them about this as well. And then she also raised the issue around the IRGC, which again, she will know that, again, the previous government also had this issue raised with them over very many years. And I have raised particularly this issue about the legislation and the need to reform the legislation. And that is exactly why I commissioned the Jonathan Hall review, because I was concerned that legislation designed for terrorism threats was not applicable in the same way to state-backed threats, and we need to ensure that we can deal with the hybrid and state-backed threats that the country now faces. Now it needs the international community to come together on this. In the face of this brutality from the Iranian regime, we need that concerted action, not just around sanctions, not just around the enforcement of the existing sanctions, but also around the overwhelming pressure. We will pursue that through the UN. We will pursue that through every avenue we can. The world is watching Iran. The world needs to be watching, and the world needs to stand together against the brutality that we have seen.
Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the question now is, what is Donald Trump going to do next? And there must be many people in the Foreign Office trying to second-guess what he may do. And the question is will we give support to Donald Trump if he decides to take action against the Iranian regime in what he would say would be in defence of the Iranian people? Or will we take the same position that we did in the summer, which was to give assistance when it came to defending American bases or Israel when the Iranians, or if the Iranians retaliate?
So she will obviously understand it is the US response will be a matter for the US government and the US administration as well, and it wouldn't be right for me to speculate on what, how and the way in which that they will respond. What I can do is set out the UK's approach around increasing the economic and diplomatic pressure on Iran, but also in calling on countries to come together to do so, because whilst a lot of countries have talked about sanctions, in practice we have not seen them enforced, and we need that concerted action together in the face of this brutality.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and to the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of her statement. Like members across the House, I feel humbled by the courage shown by so many Iranians to stand up to the tyrants in Tehran. Bravery they also showed after the death of Mahsa Amini in 2022 at the hands of the religious morality police, a crime that showed the regime's particular violence towards women. It is abundantly clear that the regime in Tehran is utterly illegitimate in the eyes of the Iranian people. And it is deeply shocking to learn that thousands of protesters have now been killed by regime forces and that further executions have already been scheduled. Madam Deputy Speaker, at this critical moment, we must take all the action available to us to support these brave protesters. We must also make sure that those in the UK who campaign for freedom and democracy in Iran and members of the British Jewish community are safe here. I welcome the new sanctions that the government has committed to today. So in light of the grotesque efforts to brutalise these protesters, will the government now personally sanction Iran's senior leadership, including Supreme Leader Khamenei? I hear the Foreign Secretary's commitment to new legislation. When it is in place, will she now commit to proscribing the IRGC, an organisation committed to suppressing dissent at home and exporting intimidation to our shores? Madam Deputy Speaker, Iran's decision makers must be held to account for their attacks on peaceful protesters, and the UK must take a lead to ensure justice is delivered. So will the Secretary of State call on the UN Security Council to open an International Criminal Court investigation into crimes against humanity committed by the Iranian government against its people? And will the government commit to using the UK's satellite capabilities to record evidence of human rights abuses which could be used to support such an ICC investigation? Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary is right to avoid giving the regime any excuse falsely to claim foreign influence. Yet we know Donald Trump has proposed direct US military intervention. Does the government consider this would be merited, politically and legally? And would it reduce or increase the risk to the brave protesters? As evidence of the violence being perpetrated by the regime continues to reach international media, the safety of British nationals in Iran must remain a priority. And so I welcome the Foreign Secretary's assurance that plans are in place to support British citizens in Iran, and I thank our ambassador and his staff for all their work.
Can I welcome the honourable member's support for the ambassador and his staff who work in obviously very difficult conditions, but can I also particularly welcome his support for the bravery of those who have protested and who now, we fear, have lost their lives as a result of their courage in the face of such a brutal regime. He asks about the processes of the future. We will we will take forward the legislation around sanctions, and I have set out measures in the statement that we will go forward on, but also to look further in conjunction with the EU at what further measures we can take. He will understand that there are processes that we need to go through, both around sanctions. He will also understand that the prescription process is always one for the Home Office as well, but I do very strongly want to see them ensure that we have a legislation in place that ensures we can deal with the different kinds of threats we face, because it's no longer just about terrorism threats. Very often we face now hybrid threats and state-backed threats on UK soil as well. We are looking further at the satellite issues as well, as I have said, and we will continue to work closely with countries across the world, and we do urge the international community to come together in condemnation and action.
West.
much, Madam Deputy Speaker. People in Hornsey and Fry and Barnet have written to me in absolute desperation. What discussions has the Foreign Secretary had with partners to coordinate efforts to promote human rights, even in these desperate times, including the treatment of prisoners, many detained so brutally since last month?
Well, we have been having many discussions with our partners. On Friday, the Prime Minister put out a statement in conjunction with the France and Germany as part of the E3, because it was as part of that E3 that we took the action in the autumn on the snapback and the introduction of new sanctions on Iran. We also, in the autumn, had pursued action through the UN and resolutions around human rights, and particularly condemning the repression of women as well as journalists too. We will continue to do that, and it is the top issue that we are discussing with our international partners at the moment.
Morrison.
Mr. Speaker, the technical issues around proscription are well understood, as they were understood by the last government as well. But 8 months ago, Jonathan Hall Casey offered a remedy to get around it, which is his statutory alert and liability threat notice vehicle. When will the government bring that forward? Because it's now urgent. And does she envisage it being used for the IRGC overall, or simply its constituent entities are particularly problematic, such as the Basij militia and the Quds Force?
Well, he will understand that I can't preempt the proper prescription processes that take place or the use of future legislation in decisions that need to be taken by the Home Office and by the Home Secretary. But I hope I have conveyed to him that this is something that I feel very strongly about, that we do need as legislation in place because of the nature of the complex and hybrid threats that we face.
Florence Shalami.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement this afternoon. And it's clear and it's good for us as a united House to send the strongest condemnation to what we are seeing, the little that we are seeing, and we know that there's a lot more. And the Foreign Secretary mentioned support for British nationals. Across my constituency of Vauxhall and Campbell Green, many constituents have contacted me, including one constituent who mentioned, in our household, my partner is Iranian. I've seen the fear in her family, which I understand given their experience. She fears for her family back home. And as her family here in Lambeth, it would mean the world for us if things could be better. So my son could visit his mother's country of birth without abduction. And equally for the mass shootings to now be against the perpetrators and the protesters to stop. I just wanted to ask the Foreign Secretary, she outlined additional sanctions. Is she ensuring that those sanctions are hitting the Iranian authorities responsible for this brutal violence instead of the innocent protesters who are trying to get their innocent points across?
My honourable friend makes a really important point about the number of people, British citizens who have Iranian family, who are deeply worried about their safety, but actually also for Iranian citizens who live lawfully here and have done so for a long time, who have also been targeted by the Iranian regime. On the point she makes about sanctions, I can assure her the UK does not sanction food or medicines, and it is very clear we make targeted decisions on how to ensure that sanctions focus on those who are responsible for the damage as opposed to the ordinary people.
John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that the attempts by the regime to suppress news of what is happening in Iraq by shutting down the internet makes the work of external media like the BBC Persian Service and Iran International all the more important? Now, given that journalists from both organisations have been attacked and threatened, can she confirm, and her colleague, the Security Minister next to her, that measures will be taken to step up the security of those journalists?
Well, I think the Honourable Member will see the fact that the Security Minister has come to be on the front bench for this debate just shows how seriously we take the threats here in the UK. He is right to talk about some of the threats that there have been made to Iran International, and I know he would join me in paying tribute to the work of our police, particularly our counter-terrorism police and our security services in ensuring that people are kept safe. And I would also pay tribute to the BBC BBC Persian service. It is clearly independent, operationally and editorially, but 1 in 4 Iranians have access to the BBC Persian service to get the latest news despite being banned in the country. That shows the impact that independent journalism can have.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Iran is a remarkable country. It has a rich history and culture, and its people have been living under tyranny for decades. They are now fighting to rid themselves of their chains, and Britain is a friend to the Iranian people, and our aim should be to stop the regime massacring its citizens and to set the people of Iran free for a democratic future. These are messages that the people of Iran would welcome. The Republic has declared war on its people. They are being murdered in the dark, and we must be a force for light. Given the internet blackout, what is the Foreign Secretary doing to ensure that the people of Iran can hear her message and this country's message of friendship and support? And some Iranians are talking about the return of Reza Pahlavi. What conversations has the government had with him? Thank you.
Well, the point that my honourable friend makes about the need to restore communications is crucial. It is crucial for us to be able to find out the sheer horror of what is happening. It is crucial for the people of Iran to be able to communicate with each other, to be able to speak out, to be able to ensure that their voices are heard. Obviously, the future of Iran is for the Iranian people, but at the moment, the regime is not allowing the Iranian people's voices to be heard, and we need to see an Iran that does not repress the rights of women, that does not kill peaceful protesters or aid Russia's aggression or support lethal threats on the streets of Britain.
Sir Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her statement to the House today. She is surely right that there are things we can do to help these desperately brave people on the streets who want their country back. Should we not make clear that the UK and all Europeans will impose every possible further sanction and restriction on this Neanderthal pariah regime? Should we not help break the communications blackout through Starlink and satellite and other technology, and make sure details of the regime-led barbarity on the streets is widely known? And finally, as her colleague, the honourable member opposite, said a moment ago, we should stop ignoring Reza Pahlavi. His is the name that is being chanted on the street. He is not seeking a restoration of the peacock throne. He wants to help usher in a new era. And will she and her colleagues at least meet him?
Well, I can tell the honourable member, and he is right to condemn the horror and brutality that we have seen. We are talking about two other countries about what can be done, for example, with access to Starlink, for example, to ensure that there can be some form of communications restored. We are also talking to our allies about what further sanctions and additional pressure and other measures can be applied. Clearly, for the reasons that I set out in the statement, the future of Iran is for the Iranian people to decide. But let us be clear, we need to see fundamental change, and we need to see an Iran that does not repress its people so brutally, that believes in the opportunities of its people for the future. That is not what we are seeing now.
Deputy Speaker, the hope of seeing the Iranian people fighting back for their freedom has turned into horror as we see the images of the body bags piled up. Over the weekend, my constituents have contacted me anxious because they're unable to contact their friends and family after the regime's imposed internet blackout. The regime is using this as a weapon to enforce silence so that the world cannot bear witness to the horror and slaughter of their own innocent citizens. Can the Foreign Secretary assure us that the British and the oppression of the Iranian people, and reaffirm Britain's steadfast support for the Iranian people in their fight for democracy?
I can confirm that to my honourable friend, that we are continuing to raise through every possible avenue that we can, directly with the Iranian regime, but also through the different international forums as well, our total condemnation of what is happening, including as the horrors emerge with each day, which become more deeply disturbing and troubling. And that is why it is so important for the international community to come together and speak with one voice.
Thank you, Madam
Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, Iran is a remarkable country and its people are remarkable. But I agree with the Foreign Secretary when she says that the actions of the Iranian regime is no aberration. She was absolutely right to say that. Will she look at prescription of IRGC, as others have said? We prescribed Wagner. That was the right thing to do. Will she bring us more information about the targeting of the Shadow Fleet, which is crucial? And finally, will she look longer term at support for civil society, who will be crucial in any rebuilding efforts?
Secretary responds. We've got 6 hours of protected business for the finance bill, so this has to move much faster, shorter questions, and this will finish in about 40 minutes. Foreign Secretary.
I can obviously have set out my response in terms of the importance of changing the legislation around prescription and also on the Shadow Fleet. We are working on further measures on the Shadow Fleet. He'll have seen the action that we have taken to support the US interdiction on the Shadow Fleet, and we will. He makes a really important point about support for civil society, because that is where the strength of the Iranian people lies.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the scenes we've seen in Iran are heartbreaking, terrifying, and I fear just a fraction of what is happening given the media blackout. The Foreign Secretary says that the world must come together, and she's right. I understand her point that it is a matter for the Home Secretary about prescription in this country, but can she confirm, given the measures that are being talked about in the European Parliament, where they've banned representatives of the Iranian government from attending, that she is talking to our European counterpart about coordinating prescription measures?
Well, what I can also assure my honourable friend is we are certainly continuing to talk with our close allies, including in Europe, on the action that is needed. And we have also sanctioned the entirety of the IRGC and placed not just the IRGC, but also the whole of the Iranian state on the enhanced tier of FIRS. That also gives us the ability to place all sorts of other restrictions and to ensure that there is pressure in place as well.
Mark Pritchard.
Reassure the House that freedom and justice will remain at the heart of British foreign policy rather than the pursuit of oil and gas, how important that might be. And I stand with her in standing up for those who are standing for freedom in Iran. Courageous, brave. Of course, freedom is not a Western construct. It is a universal right. It doesn't emanate out of London or Washington. It emanates out of the hearts of men and women across this planet. But can I ask her to draw upon the lessons of history going back to the 1950s and Operation Ajax? And of course, the Shah and his family being referenced here today. But it's important that when we see regime change and changes of leadership in the Middle East, whether in Libya, Iraq or Syria, that we learn the lessons where we've made mistakes as a country, even though we stand by those in Iran today.
Well, the honourable member is right. There are many lessons from history to learn, but this, he is also right to highlight those core values around human rights, around freedom, around justice, and I would also say, frankly, around basic humanity when people are being killed in the most brutal circumstances.
Taylor.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think it's very telling that in the past few weeks we've heard absolutely nothing from politicians from your party, from the Greens, from the Socialist Campaign Group, from the Stop Some Wars Coalition. Where have been the marches and the solidarity of the Iranian people? You cannot claim to be a progressive and care about social justice if you don't want to see the total and immediate fall of this despotic, theocratic regime. And on that point, can I ask the Foreign Secretary if she will listen to the advice of the honourable and gallant member for Tunbridge, who I think the whole House will agree is a fantastic advocate for the Iranian people, in talking now with other partners, and I hope with Iranian activists here in the UK, about if the Iranian regime does fall, what we can do to immediately support the Iranian people to build a better future, just as we're trying to do in Syria.
Well, we want to see a better future for Iran. We want to see a better future for the Iranian people. I think we have to be clear, it is the Iranian people who are expressing that urgent desire for a better future, and the future of Iran must be in their hands. But we will continue to work with international allies in support of action against the brutality that we have seen. That is exactly why we are looking at these further sanctions measures.
Deputy Speaker, when the US President tells the Iranian protesters that help is on its way, which he has just done, does that include British help? Will the government rule out the UK taking part in any planned US military intervention without multilateral authorisation?
Well, as she will know, I cannot set out the US foreign policy approach. That is for them to do. What I can do is set out the action that we are taking, the further sanctions that we will be implementing, and the work that we are doing with our international allies on how to sustain and how to significantly increase the economic and diplomatic pressure on this brutality that this regime is showing.
Andrew Pakes.
Speaker, firstly, can I put on record my thanks to our diplomatic staff working around the world to support people during this difficult situation. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary what conversations discussions he's having with our G7 and European allies about what more we can do to use new technology to record and capture and document the horrific abuses of human rights that are happening. So when the right moment arises, we can show our leadership in holding the leadership of Iran, current leadership of Iran, to account for the horrific abuses of human rights.
I thank the honourable friend for that question. We are already talking to our allies about how communications could be restored, and I will ensure that that further issue that he has raised is looked at as well on technology.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much associate myself with many of the things the Foreign Secretary has said. But may I ask her just to move beyond the hopes that people have that the regime changes? Recent NATO Parliamentary Assembly visit to the Gulf highlighted how worried those Gulf countries are about instability, and that it may not be one government that then runs Iran. So may I ask the Foreign Secretary what meetings and conversations are taking place for security of the whole region and those states that feel under threat if this regime is to fall?
The honourable member is right to raise the broader instability across the region that has obviously been fuelled by some of the actions by the Iranian regime, some of the extremist proxies that they have supported. But he's also right to say that instability in any country within the Middle East and that has implications for the Gulf as well can have much wider security ramifications, much wider instability. And we are very alert to all of those issues and discussing those issues with allies.
Dr. Ruperhart.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After the false dawns of the Arab Spring and the Zindagi Azan movement, can I ask my right honourable friend to stand firmly with the Iranian diaspora here, many of whom came after the 79 revolution, against this brutal and repressive tyrannical regime, particularly those who are critical of that regime from here? The TV station Iran International had to move from its Chiswick headquarters because of kidnapping and threats to its journalists. It's all the more needed at a time now. It's in a fortress-like, undisclosed location now that there's a communications blackout.
Well, my honourable friend will be aware of my right honourable friend, the Security Minister's strong action that he has been taking around transnational repression, and that includes transnational repression from Iran, because people who live in the UK, people need to be able to feel safe on our streets, safe to be able to debate, to communicate, and not feel that they are in any way under threat from an overseas regime.
Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, we talk about political courage in this country sometimes. It pales in comparison to the courage that these young people are showing. People like Irfan Sultani, 26 years old, who I understand reports suggest is going to be hanged today alongside other protesters. I know these situations are complex and they carry political risk. Given the courage and the risks they're facing, will the Foreign Secretary at least commit to showing whatever political courage she can if opportunities arise to help these people in all sorts of different ways in coming days?
Well, he is right to talk about some of the incredibly disturbing reports that we have seen about potential executions. We are urgently calling for this violence to end. That includes the reports on executions. This report includes the reports on further brutality. It is essential that this violence ends. The whole world is watching these horrific scenes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given mass protests, blackouts, censorships of social media and an estimated death toll of 2,000 civilians in Iran, will my right honourable friend set out what coordinated diplomatic response she is pursuing with the US and Middle East allies, and what contingency plans exist should a dangerous power vacuum develop in the country?
Well, my honourable friend raises a really important issue about risks around instability, around what happens more widely. We want to see stability across the region. We want to see safety, not just for the Iranian people, but for people across their neighbouring states as well. The safety and the basic freedoms and humanity that everyone, frankly, should have a right to enjoy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the fact that, rather belatedly, 2 weeks later, there has been a statement in the House about the situation in Iran, and pay particular attention and praise to those women who have led the opposition to great sacrifice against a regime which directs its ire particularly at women. A warning that there should be to people in this country who want to promote Sharia law and Sharia courts in our own country. But the Minister has highlighted the impact of the Iranian regime on our own citizens and our own interests. What discussions has she had with the opposition to ensure that there is a transition from this repugnant regime to a friendly, democratic and peaceful regime in Iran?
Understood what I said earlier. Questions must be short. Foreign Secretary.
Let's be clear, it is some of the greatest bravery and courage has been shown by women in Iran who do face the additional repression in their very daily lives, and I pay tribute to their bravery.
Grace.
Deputy Speaker, I welcome the statement from the Foreign Secretary today, and indeed the condemnation, as I know residents in Exeter who are desperately worried about their family in Iran will be too. The Iranian regime is one of the chief exporters of violence and instability in the region, and of course, as the Foreign Secretary set out, we're not immune to that here too. Money and effort expended online in particular in order to undermine our democracy in this country. Can the Minister set out what this government is doing to combat the regime's malign activities in this country, including through the work of the new Joint State Threats Unit? Thank you.
My honourable friend is right to raise this, because what we have seen with the kinds of hybrid threats that we have seen is state-backed, including Iranian state-backed activity that sometimes includes proxies, includes interaction with criminal gangs and criminal activity, as well as behaviour that can resemble terrorist threats as well. And it's that hybrid nature that is why that we have been increasing the coordination to deal with the joint state threats, and why the Security Minister has been driving forward action in this area.
Oliver Dowden.
We can all see the brutality of the Iranian regime, but does the Foreign Secretary agree with me it's not just who we're against, but who we're for? And if we look at the signatories to the Abraham Accords, Israel, the UAE and Bahrain in particular, they point an alternative path for peace and stability in the region. So does she agree with me we should be standing foursquare behind them? And while I'm at it, does she agree with the excellent point from the Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead? Does she think that those hundreds of thousands of protesters who came out in support of the Palestinian cause might come out in support of Iranian dissidents? I won't be holding my breath.
Well, I hope we can see the strong support for the people of Iran and for peace and stability across the region. I think it was significant that we saw so many countries come together around the peace process in Gaza, and we did see an international consensus build around that. It is still fragile, and there is much work still to do. Nevertheless, there has been an international consensus around that. We are stronger when countries work together, including standing firm against brutality and repression.
Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary will know that Hampstead and Highgate has a sizable Iranian community who are very worried about their friends and family in Iran. One of the questions my constituents have asked is, what is the FCADO thinking in terms of an official registration service for dual nationals who are currently stuck in Iran? I know the internet blackout makes this very challenging, but I'd still like to know what the Foreign Secretary is thinking in case the situation escalates and they want to come back to Britain.
Thank you. Foreign Secretary.
Well, the point my honourable friend made is one of the reasons why I highlighted as part of my statement that the key issue for the UK, and is why the work of our embassy is so important, is also about the safety of British nationals, and that includes the safety of dual nationals. So this is something that we take immensely seriously. It's why we support the continuing work of our embassy, and I pay tribute to the work that our embassy staff are doing to consider all of these issues.
Sarah Pochin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We join the Foreign Secretary in her support of the brave Iranian protesters standing up against this brutal regime. But will she confirm that if the United States does take targeted military action, that she will join us in supporting them in that action?
Well, I would say it's obviously for the US to set out their approach. I have set out the approach that we are taking here. I welcome the honourable member's condemnation of the brutality that we are seeing, not just in Tehran, but around Iran. I would just say to her that her party's comments on this would have more credibility in this area if they also spoke with the same strength of feeling about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, especially given the close links, the close and disturbing links between Iran and Russia that are one of the most troubling aspects of the Iranian regime, and that is why we should stand firm on all of these issues, and I'm disappointed she was.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Reform Party should note that the Iranian regime they've decided to be against very much support their Russian friends with the Shahed drone. They should note that. My question is this to the Foreign Secretary. Firstly, I welcome the news that we are working with allies to discuss using Starlink to overcome some of the communication barriers. Specific question around UK-British Iranian community trying to donate to people back in Iran. They can't because of sanctions. Can you just assure me and assure the House that you are looking at the specific problem for how British Iranian community can donate back to Iran? Thank you.
Mr. Thomas, you used the words "you" twice, and I'm not here to respond to your questions. Foreign Secretary.
He will obviously understand, my friend will obviously understand the importance of having an effective sanctions regime. Happy to talk to him further about the point that he raises, but as he will understand, the most immediate issue is how to try and support
Department made of the Iranian regime employing foreign militias from countries like Iraq and Lebanon to crush internal dissent in Iran. And if this is happening, what is the international community doing to limit this activity?
There is a wider issue of the impact of Iranian regime activity across the region, including supporting terrorist and extremist proxies, including supporting other organisations. This is something we are particularly sensitive to, and it is part of what makes this a broader issue about how we properly get peace and stability in the region, and that will continue to be a central part of the discussions going forward.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was in Balerno on Saturday, a constituent very politely reminded me that I had a moral obligation to be optimistic. Not always easy when you're Scottish, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker. But I do hope that what's happened in Iran does bring the international community together and really take action to deal with this horrible regime and bring it to an end. So I hope the Secretary of State will absolutely commit to that. That these murders are fuelled by oil exports, 78 billion in 2024. To what extent can we reduce that in the coming years? I know we've heard about tankers being apprehended. Is there more we can do? Surely that's not just an event.
Well, as we've seen through the case of the Bella that was interdicted by US forces with the support of the UK, there is often a very nefarious link, including through the shadow fleet, between the Iranian regime, between Russia, and spread more widely as well. So we are continuing to increase pressure around the shadow fleet and around the kinds of broader threats that are posed.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The horrendous loss of life in Iran this week has to be mourned, as does the horrendous loss of life of Palestinians in Gaza over the past 2 years has to be mourned. The British intervened in Iran in 1952 and brought about regime change. Is she aware that external regime change attempts in Iran are very unlikely to work, will actually create a much worse situation, and will she give us an undertaking that Britain will not be involved militarily with either Israel or the USA if they try military activity in Iran now?
Home Secretary.
Well, let me say again, the future of Iran must be for the Iranian people. But we should also be clear that it is not currently, there is not currently any opportunity for the Iranian people to have their voices heard, because when they have sought to do so, we have seen this incredibly, just horrifying, brutal repression. That is why we are urging an immediate end to the violence and to see fundamental change in Iran.
I pay tribute to the people who've taken to the streets of Iran, particularly in the face of industrial-scale violence and repression from this regime, as the Foreign Secretary has stated. I would, however, on that basis and the malign influence that she has already acknowledged that Iran plays in the region and in the risk it poses to British citizens and particularly those of Jewish extraction and from the Iranian diaspora, that the government would move at greater pace with regards to the issue of prescription of the IRGC.
Well, what I can reassure my honourable friend is that we take immensely seriously the state-backed threats here in the UK, including the Iranian-backed threats against Jewish communities in the UK, against their own nationals in the UK as part of the transnational repression as well. And so we ensure that is not only why, as well as sanctioning the IRGC, as well as putting the IRGC on the enhanced tier of FERS as well, it is also why we have substantially increased the training for police forces across the country on state-backed threats, and this is something that our counter-terrorism police, who do an excellent job, take immensely seriously.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Right now, peaceful protesters who are unarmed are being gunned down on the streets, not just of Tehran, but every city and every town in Iran. They're being hunted down to hospitals if they're injured, or hunted down to where they live. The difference between 2022 and now is that this is a nationwide protest calling for regime change. And what people desperately want to hear, and I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement, is not more words, but actual action. We're told repeatedly that the Home Office and the Foreign Office can't agree on prescription of the IRGC. Could she therefore go away, speak to the Home Secretary and get this organised now as a demonstration that we're not going to tolerate this, and we'll stand full square behind those brave people of Iran who just want liberty and freedom?
Well, I think the honourable member is right to talk about the difference being the way in which that this has spread right across Iran. We've seen small towns in different parts of Iran, as well as obviously the capital city itself. But just in terms of the issues around prescription, there is clear, strong agreement between the Home Office and the Foreign Office about the importance of making sure that we have the right tools to be able to deal with state-backed threats, just as we have for terrorism threats. That's what the Jonathan Hall review was all about. I would gently remind him that a previous government did not address this and did not change the legislation for many years. I know this is something that he has highlighted over many years, but I hope there will be cross-party agreement on the importance of addressing this.
Mark Stewart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The people of Iran are courageously fighting against an oppressive regime for their freedom, and we all stand with them. The brutal response from Tehran, though, does highlight the need to take action against the IRGC. Now, I know it's been addressed multiple times during this session, but when does the government plan to bring forward the legislative framework proposed by Jonathan Hall that will give prescription-like powers to the government to deal with the IRGC and their malign influence in the UK.
Secretary.
Well, I think we should be clear. This is not just about the IRGC. This is about the whole of the Iranian regime. And we've looked at if you look at the brutality and what has been taking place. I have also, I think, set out the importance of us ensuring that we have a broad breadth of powers here in the UK, but also that we use the powers that we have, which is why the IRGC is already sanctioned and which is why their counter-terror police, precision police and security service already pursue any threat and any malign activity here in the UK.
Sarah Dyke.
Deputy Speaker, Annette from Wincanton contacted me at the weekend, deeply worried about her extended friends and family living in Iran. She told me that many there feel they have nothing much to lose now as they come out on the streets to protest against the repressive Iranian regime. So at this really volatile moment, what measures is the Secretary of State taking to support ordinary Iranian citizens who are protesting against their government while holding the Iranian regime accountable for their repression and human rights abuses?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, here in the UK, as I set out in my statement, we have summoned the Iranian ambassador today to account for the horrendous reports that we have seen emerging further this morning that follows the coordinated work that we have been doing with our international allies to make clear the strength of our condemnation of the brutality, but also to pursue further sanctions and further economic pressure on the Iranian regime.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the Foreign Secretary join me in firmly rejecting the instincts of some, including honourable members in this House, who blame the current situation on the United States, the UK, Israel, the West? And would she further agree with me that the blame for the current situation lies squarely with this oppressive regime in Tehran?
The responsibility for what we have seen and for potentially thousands of deaths, of killings that we have seen, lies squarely with the Iranian regime.
Dr. Eddie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement today by the Foreign Secretary, and like her, I condemn absolutely the repressive, violent, vicious crackdown on protesters by the Iranian regime, and pay tribute to the bravery of so many Iranian citizens who over so many years have protested, have advocated, have campaigned, have been on the streets calling for fundamental rights and freedoms for all citizens. I welcome the new sanctions against the regime that she's announced today. She also talked about sending a message to other countries that seek to break those UN sanctions. Can she say, is she considering other concrete measures against such countries who engage in sanctions busting, such as sanctions against them?
Well, what I can say is I think the action that we saw with the vessel that was interdicted by the US, that was an example of enforcement around sanctions. It was supported by the UK, but as we saw, that a vessel that had links not just to Iran, but also to Russia as well. She is right that we do need to call on all countries around the world to respect the UN sanctions process, but also to realise this is not a time to be supporting this Iranian regime.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for her strong words today. I, like many members, have been contacted by constituents in Glasgow West very concerned about not being able to contact friends and family who are still in that country. But I would join with the right honourable friend in congratulating or applauding those female activists in Iran who've been relentlessly targeted by this repressive regime. And I do join her in applauding them who have been fighting very bravely for their freedom this week. And when the time comes, and I sincerely hope it does come very quickly, will she ensure that their voices and their actions can be part of building a new democracy in Iran?
Well, it is, I think, the 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security resolution at the United Nations, which puts at its heart not just should we stand up for women victims of conflict or women victims of repression and persecution, but women's voices need to be heard as part of any positive peace and reconciliation process.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Not only is this despotic Iranian regime gunning down protesters in the streets, it continues to support terrorist proxies such as Hamas and Hezbollah. It provides drones to the Russian military in Ukraine and remains a very real threat to this country. So while I welcome the statement today, can the Foreign Secretary assure the House that the police and the security services have all the tools they need to keep Britain safe from Iran and its proxies?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can assure him that the police security services have our full backing in all of the work they do to keep us safe from state-backed threats, including from Iranian-backed threats on our soil. I think we also need to always look at how we need to keep up with rapidly changing hybrid threats to make sure that we can keep our country safe.
Lawrence Turner.
Speaker, and thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement. I echo the comments made a few months ago by my honourable friend. The regime severance of communications is adding to the distress of many of our constituents who are trying to establish the safety and personal liberty of loved ones. Now, I appreciate that there may be things that cannot be said in this place, lest they inadvertently inform the regime. But can she give the House an assurance that all practical measures are being explored to increase both the quantity and the quality of information going into and out of Iran?
Secretary.
Well, we want the people of Iran to be able to communicate with each other. And this is about the people of Iran. It is about their courage and their most basic rights to be able to communicate with each other. And that is what we want to support.
Isabel Roberts.
We are, of course, appalled at reports of thousands of state killings in Iran and support the fundamental right of the people of Iran to self-determination. President Trump is saying that help is on its way. There are also reports that the Prime Minister is set to accept a place on President Trump's board to run Gaza. Given this, can she guarantee that her government's priorities in the region will be peace and stability alone?
Secretary.
Well, it is exactly because we want peace and stability in the region that we supported the 20-point plan to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. As I previously said, that is still fragile and there is a huge amount of work still to do, including the humanitarian surge in support, including the decommissioning of weapons from Hamas. Huge amount of work still to do, but it's really important that the whole international community comes together in order to support that.
Sir Julian Lewis.
In March it will be the 5th anniversary of the signing of the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership between Iran and China, an unholy alliance between religious fanatics and communist totalitarians who we are regrettably about to award a super embassy complete with secret dungeons in London. Can the Foreign Secretary tell me what estimate the government has made of the dependence of the Iranian regime's survival on its support from China, not least the huge exports of Iranian oil to China?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I would urge China to support the UN sanctions process that was triggered by the snapback that the UK, France and Germany instigated in October. It is essential that they do so because we have seen the pressure that is needed around the nuclear programme, something that affects all of our safety, is immensely important. I think not just China, but countries around the world should support that sanctions process.
Stefan Perot.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I am appalled by the actions of the murderous Iranian regime. But I'm deeply concerned that the financial secrecy of our overseas territories is enabling sanctions dodging. Can the Foreign Secretary assure me that she's doing everything she can to secure greater transparency in the overseas territories, to uphold the effect of international sanctions and end any complicity in the flow of blood money fueling this regime?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, we have strongly pushed for greater transparency, including the overseas territories, and my honourable friend, the Minister for who covers the overseas territories, continues to do that with all of the overseas territories. What I would say is that the action that some of those territories have taken has actually been extremely important in implementing sanctions and has demonstrated what can be done and what can be achieved, and that's one of the reasons why we are determined to see the further progress around transparency more widely.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The people of Iran have suffered for far too long, and they have made it clear enough is enough, and we stand with them. For too long, this government has remained largely silent on the oppression of Christians in the Middle East generally. Many countries, including Iran, murder and maim any person who does not conform to their dictated religion. Will the Minister assure this House, in her diplomatic efforts for peace in the region, she will prioritise religious freedom and the rights of Christians to exist and practice their religion without fear of persecution?
Foreign Secretary. Well, it's exactly because we take so seriously the issues around freedom of belief. We have appointed UK envoy exactly to keep pursuing this because it is so important. These are basic rights, basic part of our humanity for Christians, for people of all faiths and all religions, not just across the Middle East, but across the world.
That is the end of the statement on Iran. I'll give the few. A point of order, Mark Richards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I seek your guidance. Since Christmas, hundreds of my constituents have not received a single letter via the Royal Mail. This is causing huge anxiety for those waiting for medical results, important documentation, job offers, etc. The local post office team, postmen and women, have said this is a result of management decisions at the most senior level. What advice can you give me to pass on to my constituents? The possibility of the Minister for the Royal Mail and Postal Services coming to the House to make an urgent statement to ensure that this is thoroughly and fully investigated and those letters begin to land on doormats once again in Shropshire.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving notice that he intended to draw attention to this matter. As he knows, this is not actually a point of order, but he is an experienced member who serves on the panel of chairs, and he does not need any guidance from the chair on how to take this matter further. No doubt he'll be pursuing it. And also, the Treasury front bench would have heard his request for a statement or a response from the appropriate minister. Point of order, Richard Holden. Is it a short point of order, Richard Holden?
Always, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, the Cabinet Office Guide to Parliamentary Work is clear that there should be no inconsistencies between information provided in answers to written questions and information released under the Freedom of Information Act, and that material disclosable under Freedom of Information should also be disclosed to Parliament. On the 2nd and 4th of December, in WPQs, I asked the Secretary of State for Transport what information the DVLA hold about third-party intermediary organisations acting on behalf of Oxford City Council and Oxfordshire County Council in accessing vehicle keeper data. In both cases, the Minister for Local Transport told me that this information was not appropriate to disclose because of commercial sensitivities. However, shortly afterwards, the DVLA released under FOI the Coda contract with Oxfordshire County Council, confirming contractual arrangements involving intermediaries and third-party access, with only personal data redacted. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd be grateful for your guidance on this apparent inconsistency and whether you might raise it with the Leader of the House or departments concerned.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving notice of his point of order. I take it that he has informed the honourable member for Wakefield and Rothwell that he intended to raise the matter in the House and is nodding accordingly. As the honourable member knows, the Chair is not responsible for the accuracy of ministerial answers, if only we were. But I'm sure the table office will be able to advise him on how he might pursue the matter further. And once again, no doubt the Treasury front bench have made a note and will be passing that information on directly to the Minister involved. If that is the end of the point of orders, I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over. Presentation of Bill, Secretary Wes Streeting. Which Minister is nodding?
Medical Training Prioritisation Bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Are we sure? Yes. Tomorrow. Presentation of Bill Kirsty Blackman. Not. Oh, you're here. Marvellous. Good.
Removal of Peerages Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 13th of March.
Friday the 13th of March. Now we go on to the 10-minute rule motion. Emergency and life-saving skills schools. Dr Neil Shastri has.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the teaching in schools of skills relating to emergency situations, including life-saving skills and for connected purposes. The Emergency and Life-Saving Skills Schools Bill seeks to ensure that every child leaving school possesses the knowledge and skills to respond effectively in emergencies, including life-threatening situations. It is a bill about equipping young people with capabilities that matter beyond the classroom, skills that can preserve life and, in certain circumstances, protect communities. Every year, Madam Deputy Speaker, thousands of people in England find themselves at the centre of sudden, chaotic emergencies. A child at the roadside following a road traffic collision, a victim of knife crime bleeding out, a medical emergency unfolding whilst onlookers wait for an ambulance, watching as precious minutes slip away. All they want to do is help, but too many do not know how. Not infrequently, the question asked afterwards is not what went wrong, but why no one present knew what to do. Most emergencies don't happen in hospitals. They happen in our homes, they happen on our streets, and they happen on our roadsides. It's in those first critical moments before professional help arrives, outcomes are often determined, not by advanced medicine, but by whether those present can recognise what is happening, act decisively, and summon help effectively. Evidence consistently shows that early recognition and rapid intervention saves lives. Delay, confusion, or failure to communicate accurately with the emergency services can be fatal. And yet, despite this, our education system still leaves too much to chance. At present, Madam Deputy Speaker, whether a young person is taught how to recognise an emergency, how to remain calm under pressure, how to summon help accurately, or how to apply basic life-saving interventions depends largely on postcode, school discretion, or family circumstance. Some pupils do receive this knowledge, many do not. There is simply no guarantee. This is not a criticism, Madam Deputy Speaker, of our schools or our teachers, who already shoulder enormous responsibility. It is simply a recognition that we have not set a clear national expectation that these skills matter. This bill seeks to close that gap. It is built around three core aims. First, to ensure that pupils can recognise emergency situations quickly and accurately. The difference between an accident and an emergency is not always obvious, particularly under pressure. Training pupils to assess severity, identify immediate danger, and understand when urgent action is required is foundational to this. Second, to prioritise effective summoning of emergency assistance. Knowing how to contact the emergency services, what information to provide, how to remain calm, and how to follow instructions given by call handlers is not always instinctive, and it must be taught. Clear communication saves time, and time saves lives. Third, to ensure that pupils receive practical, hands-on instruction in the most critical life-saving interventions, with particular emphasis on the management of catastrophic bleeding. Uncontrolled hemorrhage is one of the leading causes of preventable death in trauma. Pupils should learn how to identify severe bleeding, apply direct pressure, use tourniquets where appropriate, and act decisively to stabilise the casualty whilst prioritising their own safety. This should include, of course, formal stop-the-bleed training. These life-saving skills are not confined, of course, to domestic accidents. In mass casualty situations, such as terrorist-style attacks, rapid recognition of danger, safe decision-making, and early bleeding control can save multiple lives before emergency services arrive. What is equally important is that pupils should be trained to assess the risk for themselves, to avoid secondary harm, and to act only when it's safe to do so. This is, of course, not about encouraging recklessness, but about fostering informed, disciplined action. And the importance of this cannot be overstated. In emergencies, well-intentioned but untrained bystanders can inadvertently worsen outcomes or place themselves in danger. The training that is envisaged under this bill should instil practical resilience, knowing when to act, how to act, and when not to act. Evidence shows that repeated practice and realistic simulations significantly improve retention and the likelihood of effective intervention under pressure. The objectives of this bill are reinforced by the works of organisations such as Citizen Aid, which has led the way in educating young people on safe responses to major incidents. Citizen Aid was founded by two of my former bosses, Professor Sir Keith Porter and Major General Tim Hodgetts, and I had the pleasure of hosting them to do a drop-in event in Parliament last year. Its programmes demonstrate that pupils can learn to recognise threats, manage catastrophic bleeding, communicate effectively, and act without panic. Their work shows that structured training builds both competence and confidence, particularly in high-stress scenarios. This is not about turning children into paramedics. It's not about overloading the curriculum. It's not about replacing professional emergency services. It is about ensuring that every young person leaves school equipped with a core set of practical, age-appropriate skills, how to recognise an emergency, how to respond safely, and how to communicate clearly with the emergency services. And critically, how to provide basic life-saving assistance until help arrives. This is because preparedness is not a niche concern, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a matter of resilience. One day, any one of us here may depend upon not upon a professional, but on a passerby. That passerby may be a young person standing there, willing and wanting to help, but uncertain what to do in the circumstances. That uncertainty should not be inevitable. Importantly, this bill is not proposing radical change. Many countries already include emergency response skills within their education system. Here at home, we teach elements of first aid and health and safety in different ways, but we lack consistency, and without the assurance that every child will receive that education. Concerns about pressure on the school curriculum are understandable, but this bill doesn't seek to require wholesale reform, nor does it seek to impose excessive burdens. Training can be delivered through a combination of classroom teaching, practical workshops and simulations. All of these can be supported by qualified instructors, the emergency services and voluntary organisations. The focus must be on gaining those essential high-impact skills. The intent behind this bill reflects a broader societal responsibility. It's not about ideology, it simply recognises that preserving life is a fundamental public good. Pupils trained in these skills will carry them into their families, their workplaces and communities, and thereby have a multiplying effect. In doing so, schools will be directly contributing to national resilience and public safety. What this bill proposes is clarity and coherence, a national expectation that life-saving knowledge is a fundamental part of the curriculum as much as literacy or numeracy when it comes to preparing young people for the real world. International experience reinforces this argument. Countries that embed emergency response training in schools see higher levels of bystander intervention, improved survival rates and greater public confidence. It also reflects a broader truth, that resilience begins long before a crisis occurs. It is built through education, confidence and preparation. By equipping young people with these skills, we do not only improve outcomes in emergencies, we foster responsibility, calm decision-making and a willingness to act for others. This bill is deliberately rooted in prevention rather than reaction, in empowerment rather than fear. Of course, no legislation can prevent every tragedy, but we can ensure that when emergencies do happen, as they inevitably will, the people closest are not left powerless. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill does not ask the House to make a dramatic leap in policy. It asks us to take a sensible, proportionate step to ensure that our education system reflects the realities of the world our young people will face. For the hardest burden of any of us to carry is not that we tried and failed, but that a life was lost whilst we stood by, not through indifference, but through the absence of knowledge this House could have chosen to provide.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
John Cooper, Lincoln Jopp, Charlie Dewhurst, Blake Stevenson, Bradley Thomas, Jim Shannon and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Dr Neil Shastri Hurst.
That's good. Very smooth.
Emergency and Life-Saving Skills Schools Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 29th of May 2026.
Friday the 29th of May 2026. Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Finance number 2 Bill Committee.
Now.
Order. Under the order of the House of the 16th of December, we shall now move to Committee of the Whole House. Order.
Finance number 2 Bill, clauses 63 to 68, clauses 83 to 85 and Schedule 13, clause 86, and any new clauses or new schedules relating to the subject matter of those clauses and that schedule.
I remind members that in committee, members should not address the Chair as Deputy Speaker, but please use our names when addressing the Chair. Madam Chair, Chair and Madam Chairman are also acceptable. We will start with the group on inheritance tax on pension interests, and we begin with clause 63, stand part, with which it will be convenient to consider the clauses stand part and new clauses on the selection paper. The question is that clause 63 stand part of the bill. I call the Minister, Lucy Rigby.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to open this second day of Finance Bill Committee stage debates. Yesterday, my honourable friend, the Exchequer Secretary, set out how this bill gives effect to a budget that took fair and responsible decisions to stabilise and strengthen the public finances, address the cost of living and renew our public services. We're clear, Madam Chair, that we will not repeat mistakes of the last government. That means no return to austerity and no completely irresponsible, unfunded spending commitments either, each of which, unfortunately, were features of the party opposite's time in power. This government wholeheartedly rejects those failed approaches, and we instead choose a different path, one of fiscal responsibility and one which will strengthen our economy so that it delivers for people right across this country. Today, the House will consider a further set of important and targeted measures relating to pensions, gambling duties and alcohol duty, which reflect this government's commitment to a tax system that's fair, modern and aligned with the realities of today's economy. Our approach to changes to gambling taxation are, as we'll come to later on this afternoon, fair and proportionate, and as my right honourable friend the Chancellor set out in her budget, our reforms to gambling taxation will significantly contribute to this government's efforts to lift an additional 450,000 children out of poverty. On pensions, the clauses before the House ensure that generous tax reliefs continue to support pensions' core purpose, that is, helping people save for retirement. They address long-standing inconsistencies and ensure that pensions are not used primarily as a vehicle for passing on wealth free of inheritance tax, but instead continue to protect the vast majority of estates and maintain strong incentives to save. Madam Chair, I'll turn now to clauses 63 to 68. Pensions enjoy significant tax benefits, with gross income tax and national insurance contributions relief costing £78.2 billion in 2023-24. It's therefore crucial to ensure that these reliefs are being used for their intended purpose, which is to encourage saving for retirement and later life. Changes to pensions tax policy over the last decade by the previous government led to pensions being used and increasingly marketed as tax planning vehicles to transfer wealth rather than holding true to pensions' primary purpose, which is, of course, providing a way to fund retirement. As honourable members will know, there are also long-standing inconsistencies in the inheritance tax treatment of different types of pensions. Most UK registered pension schemes are discretionary, meaning members are able to nominate who they would like to receive any death benefits, but the scheme trustees are not obliged to follow members' wishes. Under existing rules, any unused pension funds and death benefits from discretionary schemes are not subject to inheritance tax. By contrast, there are some pension schemes that are non-discretionary, and these are subject to inheritance tax under existing rules. Madam Chair, the changes made by Clause 63 mean that most unused pension funds and death benefits payable from a pension will form part of a person's estate for inheritance tax purposes from the 6th of April 2027. Clause 64 ensures that personal representatives are responsible for paying any inheritance tax due. Clause 65 means personal representatives will be able to request that the pension scheme administrator withholds paying a proportion of benefits where certain conditions are met. It also allows both personal representatives and pension beneficiaries to make pension scheme administrators pay inheritance tax due on pensions directly to HMRC, again provided certain conditions are met. Clause 64 makes some consequential amendments to the Inheritance Tax Act 1984 to ensure that the existing exemption for spouses and civil partners and the treatment of payments to charities continue to apply. Clause 67 changes the income tax rules for pensions to provide for the payment of inheritance tax, including in respect of direct payment by pension schemes. And Clause 68 ensures that the changes take effect from the 6th of April 2027. Madam Chair, these clauses ensure that pensions are used, as I said, for their core intended purpose rather than as a vehicle for passing on wealth free of inheritance tax. These clauses also remove long-standing inconsistencies and deliver on the government's promise to this country to build a stronger and a fairer economy.
Shadow Minister James Wilde.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I wish to speak on behalf of His Majesty's opposition to new clauses 22, 23 and 24, tabled in my name and those of my honourable friends. And as the Minister set out, clause 63 to 68 introduced measures to apply inheritance tax to unspent pension assets and other death benefits for deaths occurring after the 6th of April 2027. Madam Chair, this Labour government has taken taxes to record levels, £26 billion in additional taxes in this budget, £66 billion since the election. Tax increases that were not mentioned in their manifesto. And Labour is increasing taxes on family businesses, on farms, on jobs, on dividends, on savings, on motorists, and now death. Removing the inheritance tax exemption for pensions could undermine efforts to encourage people to save at a time when people aren't saving enough. And what does the government do? They limit the salary sacrifice pensions contribution scheme and introduce a new raid on people's pensions pots. The Minister didn't refer to the impact assessment, but it is worth pointing out that it estimates that 10,500 estates will now become liable for inheritance tax, raising £1.5 billion by 2029, and 38,500 estates will pay more inheritance tax than previously was the case. And that's why we oppose this extension of inheritance tax. And the underlying principle, which the Minister seemed to allude to, that people's money doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the state. New Clause 22 is straightforward. It requires the Chancellor to set out the impact of these measures on pension saving, household saving decisions and on personal representatives. There is real concern, I'm surprised the Minister didn't address this, about the administrative burden that is being placed on personal representatives and the effect on the industry. Personal representatives will be required to identify every pension asset, to calculate the inheritance tax due and ensure payment within 6 months. And they will be personally liable if they fail to settle all the liabilities that are due. In many cases, that deadline will be impossible to meet and it must be extended. Furthermore, if a pension fund has to sell illiquid assets, such as commercial property, quickly, it may well not get the full market value. But the bill does not introduce a relief where the underlying assets must be sold and the proceeds were less than the value of the assets at the time of death. Late payments will attract interest at 8%. By contrast, someone in self-assessment has 10 months to pay tax on the income they already understand. Both the Association of Taxation Technicians and the Chartered Institute have offered some practical solutions. Firstly, to extend the withholding periods, personal representatives can ask pension administrators to withhold 50% of funds for up to 15 months. But that's simply not long enough for the complex cases I've referred to, particularly where business property valuations have to be agreed with the HMRC. Will a minister consider allowing HMRC to extend withholding in such complex cases? Second, they should allow instalment payments for illiquid pension assets. Billions of pounds of pension wealth are in these illiquid assets. The government allows inheritance tax to be paid over 10 years for illiquid estate assets. Why deny the same practical relief for pensions? When this policy was announced, the OBR gave it a very high uncertainty rating and estimated behavioural effects will cut the static yield by around 43%. So the government's own forecasters accept these changes may well significantly alter saving behaviour, and the new clause simply requires the Chancellor to assess that impact and come to the House to make it clear. New clause 23 requires the Chancellor to consult on the impact of sections 63 to 67 and whether they deliver better outcomes for savers and pensioners. The truth is the government rushed this consultation out after the 2024 budget and followed it with a very narrow technical consultation which did not consider the principled question of whether this approach to pensions being brought with inheritance tax framework at all was appropriate. As the Investing and Savings Alliance told the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee in their inquiry, which the Exchequer Secretary gave evidence to, they said if we were consulted and listened to, we'd probably not be having this discussion today because I do not think pensions will be going into IHT. And both the Chartered Institute and ATT have criticised the government for consulting on pensions in isolation rather in the context of individuals' wider inheritance tax position. So our clause is explicit. Consultation must take place to assess whether these changes deliver better outcomes for savers and pensions, wording which reflects the commitment the Labour Party made in their manifesto. Our third new clause 24, is essential. It would require the HMRC to publish comprehensive guidance on the new rules for pensions and to set up a dedicated helpline. And why does this matter? Because this measure will be incredibly complex in practice. The Chartered Institute has said that professional executors are already questioning whether they can continue to operate in the market at all. Some firms, we're told, are already leaving the market. And if professionals step back, the burden falls on lay personal representatives, often grieving family members or friends, with more errors, delay and potentially a wider tax gate ensuing. Professional indemnity insurers also need clarity. Yet when is the HMRC due to deliver detailed guidance? Not until spring 2027, just weeks before these changes take effect. That is completely outrageous and far too late. And that's why this clause would require guidance to be published within 6 months of this Act being passed. I want to touch on a broader concern which has been raised with me around the serious unintended consequences potentially for unmarried couples. While today couples can anticipate making financial provision for each other via pensions, if this measure comes into force, they will have to look at other options. If one member of an unmarried couple in their 50s or 60s dies with a pension at peak value, the survivor could lose up to 40% of that fund. Are ministers talking to pension scheme administrators to mitigate the risks for such couples and to provide clear guidance? Madam Chair, these clauses increase taxes, they add complexity, they penalise saving and they add stress for grieving families. Despite clause 67, we're also advised there's still a risk of double taxation of inheritance tax and income tax, which could see beneficiaries paying an effective rate of 67%. So our amendments seek to mitigate its worst impacts, and the Chancellor should assess the real impact on saving behaviour and personal representatives. She should consult properly on these provisions, and she must provide clear guidance backed by dedicated support. We should be incentivising saving, encouraging people to do the right thing. Extending inheritance tax does the opposite, and we will oppose these measures tonight.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a retrospective tax without transitional protection. It upends plans for those who have already made sacrifices to build up their pensions, undermines confidence in pensions planning, reduces long-term investment and causes people to rush to withdraw money from their pensions too. As has been mentioned already, the Chartered Institute and ACT have raised concerns about these clauses which are shoehorning pensions legislation into tax legislation. There are major worries about creating personal liability without control for personal representatives, whether executors or administrators. Personal representatives, as we've heard, are legally obligated to gather all the assets, settle any liabilities, including inheritance tax, and distribute the remainder of the estate to the beneficiaries. They are personally liable if they do not set aside enough money to settle all financial liabilities, including IHT. Experts have warned that being personally liable for IHT on a pension fund that never comes into their hands leaves the door open to costly and protracted litigation and will understandably make personal representatives, such as professionals or friends of the deceased, much more cautious before they distribute all of the estate. Even more concerning is the fact that if representatives discover a new pension fund after settling the initial IHT liability, this will have a knock-on effect not only on the estate but on all other pension funds. It means that IHT will have to be recalculated for every part of the estate and every pension fund. It is far from uncommon for people to have had different jobs with separate pension plans, so the risk of miscalculation is obvious. If someone passes away before they've had the chance to consolidate their pension funds, tracking down these unused pots within 6 months of their death will be very difficult for executors and will mean that the initial IHT calculations could be wrong. The government must recognise and amend this. If it doesn't, and ministers simply ask future executors to sign some sort of disclaimer form, the government will soon find that nobody will want to take on that role. Our amendments in new clauses 18, 19 and 20 raise the clear need for significant reforms and are a means of pressing the government to protect individuals from being liable for private pensions they didn't know about and couldn't reasonably know about either. Finally, Madam Chair, there is widespread worry that family members might have to wait up to 15 months before they are able to access their inheritance during what is bound to be a hugely straining period of loss and grief. Our proposed NC20 urges the government to recognise that reality and take steps to address it.
Minister.
Madam Chair, thank you. And let me begin by thanking honourable members for their contributions to today's debate on these clauses. And I will respond to each of the specific points that have been raised, but I want to first reflect briefly again on what I set out at the outset as being the core purpose of this bill. This bill contains fair and necessary reforms to the tax system, which unfortunately have been ducked for far too long. They will help to strengthen our economy for the long term, ensuring that we can cut the cost of living and inflation, restore our public services to health and restore the public finances to health too. And the Tories and Reform, who indeed are increasingly indistinguishable, it might be said, have already set out their choice, a return to the chaos and indeed to the instability of the past as well. That approach failed before and we're not going back. The clauses we've debated today restore pensions, as I said, to their core and intended purpose, which is funding retirement, not allowing them to function as a tax-free vehicle for the transfer of wealth. And generous tax relief for retirement saving is preserved. The clauses presented today ensure that pension wealth is treated fairly and consistently for inheritance tax purposes. They protect ordinary families with more than 90% of estates still paying no inheritance tax at all each year after these changes. Madam Chair, I'll now turn to the non-government amendments tabled for this session. And new clause 18 would require the Treasury to review the effects of the changes to pension tax policy, including their impacts on individuals, administrators and behaviour. A report would need to be laid in Parliament no later than 6 months from the date that the clauses come into force. Madam Chair, this amendment is not necessary. The Government has published a tax information and impact note in the normal way on these changes, and this sets out the impact on individuals, households and families, and it also accounts for the impact on personal representatives too. The Government also, as honourable members know, keep all tax policies under review through the monitoring of returns and communication with representative bodies and taxpayer groups. A review within 6 months of the policy taking effect on the 6th of April 2027 is not practical, not least because the data relating to inheritance tax in 2027-28 will not be fully available until the summer of 2030. This is the normal timescale and operates because tax liabilities data is only available with a long lag, including because the filing of the relevant inheritance tax accounts is due 12 months after a death. And for those reasons, Madam Chair, I therefore move that new clause 18 should be rejected. Madam Chair, I'll now turn to new clause 19, which would require the Government to report on the impact of the reforms on personal representatives. This would include the personal liability for tax on pension assets outside of the estate and any practical difficulties of identifying and valuing multiple pension arrangements within existing time limits. These changes that this bill brings about are consistent with the process which already exists for administering estates and paying any tax due. Personal representatives are already responsible for administering the rest of the estate, including non-discretionary pension schemes, which are already, as I said, within the scope of inheritance tax. The Government has acknowledged that there are some challenges for personal representatives, and the changes announced at budget mitigate the risks to personal representatives by providing them with the ability to direct pension scheme administrators to withhold taxable benefits for up to 15 months from the date of death, and indeed to direct them to make payments of inheritance tax directly to HMRC. This will, of course, not apply to pension benefits which are exempt from inheritance tax, including those being left to a spouse or civil partner, pension funds under £1,000 and continuing annuities. The Government will also publish regulations this year to provide the right framework to allow personal representatives and pension schemes to exchange all of the necessary information for inheritance tax purposes. The changes announced at Budget 25 also protect personal representatives from the risk that pension pots emerge later. And for these reasons, Madam Chair, new clause 19 is not necessary and should therefore be rejected. Madam Chair, new clause 20 would require the Government to review the tax administration arrangements relating to inherited pension pots with a focus on any delays in the payment of inherited pension pots caused by tax administration processes. HMRC would be required to publish the outcome of the review within 12 months of the passing of this Act. The Government does not want payments to pension beneficiaries to be delayed unnecessarily, and in the vast majority of cases, payments will be made as soon as pension schemes have completed their discretionary processes. Pension benefits that are exempt from inheritance tax, such as payments to spouses and civil partners, or death in service payments, can still be paid as soon as the pension scheme is ready to pay. We do, of course, need to strike a fair balance between beneficiaries of the pension and of the wider estate. And that's exactly why we announced that personal representatives will be able to direct pension schemes to withhold 50% of the taxable benefits for up to 15 months if they reasonably expect inheritance tax to be due. Pension beneficiaries will therefore still be able to access 50% of their taxable pension benefits as soon as their pension scheme is ready to pay, and the remainder once the inheritance tax on the pension has been paid, or indeed the notice to withhold has been withdrawn. And as I've set out, to ensure that the process of calculating, reporting and paying inheritance tax does not take any longer than necessary, the Government will introduce regulations setting out deadlines for the parties involved to exchange information. New clause 20, Madam Chair, should therefore be rejected. Moving to new clause 22, this would require the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement on the effects of the policy on pension saving levels, household saving decisions and personal representatives. And this statement would need to be made within 6 months of the Act being passed. It's very important to emphasise that the intended purpose of pension savings, and indeed one that this government wholly supports, is to fund retirement. And that is why, to address the Shadow Exchequer Secretary's point, we continue to incentivise pension savings with tax relief on both contributions to pensions and the growth of funds held within a pension scheme. And those reliefs totalled £78.2 billion in 2023-24. Estates will continue to benefit from the normal nil rate bans, reliefs and exemptions available. For example, the nil rate bans mean an estate can pass on up to £1 million with no inheritance tax liability, and the general rules mean any transfers, including the payments of death benefits to a spouse or civil partner, are fully exempt from inheritance tax. Madam Chair, as I said, 90% of UK estates will continue to have no inheritance tax liability whatsoever following these changes, and the reforms will only affect a minority with inheritable pension wealth. New clause 22, Madam Chair, should therefore be rejected. Moving now to new clause 23, which would require the Chancellor of the Exchequer to undertake a consultation before the 6th of April 2027 on the potential impacts of these changes. The consultation would consider the extent to which the changes to inheritance tax on pension interest deliver better outcomes for UK savers and pensioners. The Government did indeed launch a technical consultation on the day of autumn budget 2024, following the announcement of the policy to draw on the expertise of tax, legal and pension industries. That technical consultation was focused on the processes required to implement the changes, and the Government has made changes as a result of that consultation. As well as the technical consultation on these changes, there's been extensive and regular engagement with stakeholders from both the pensions industry and legal and tax representatives too. And I note the praise for HMRC officials from witnesses at the Economic Affairs Finance Bill Subcommittee in the other place as to how they've engaged on these issues over the course of the last year. Madam Chair, the policy problem with the inheritance tax treatment of pensions is well understood, and we need to ensure that pensions continue to be used, as I said, for their core purpose, which is funding retirement, and that tax reliefs are directed to that effect. And as I've set out, Madam Chair, pensions will continue to enjoy significant tax benefits. For those reasons, new clause 23 should be rejected. Turning lastly, Madam Chair, to new clause 24, which would require HMRC to publish comprehensive guidance on the implementation of the policy within 6 months of the Act being passed. It also requires that HMRC establish a dedicated helpline for inquiries relating to inheritance tax on pension interests. As I've set out, Madam Chair, comprehensive guidance will be published in advance of April 2027, and HMRC will provide interactive tools to support personal representatives. Publishing guidance when policies go live is, of course, established practice and ensures that guidance is fully up to date when made available. However, HMRC will continue to work with industry on shaping this guidance and ensuring that the reforms are fully understood. People will be able to call the inheritance tax helpline for inquiries related to these reforms, and as you would expect, staff will be fully trained on each of these changes such that they can support customers. It's on this basis, Madam Chair, that new clause 24 should also be rejected. And Madam Chair, with these clauses, generous tax relief for retirement saving is preserved. I therefore urge the House to reject new clauses 18 to 20 and new clauses 20 to 24, and I beg to move that clauses 63 to 68 stand part of this bill.
The question is that clause 63 stand part of the bill. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Is that clause 63 stand part of the bill. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Mark Ferguson and Taiwo Owatemi. The tellers for the noes, Lincoln Jopp and Alicia Kearns.
The ayes to the right, 348. The noes to the left, 167.
The ayes to the right were 348. The noes to the left, 167. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Thank you. With the leave of the House, I shall put together the questions that clauses 64 to 68 stand part of the bill. The question is that clauses 64 to 68 stand part of the bill. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. New clause 24 has been selected for a separate decision. I call James Wilde to move the new clause 24 formally.
HMRC guidance on inheritance tax on pension interests.
The question is that new clause 24 be read a second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No! Division! Clear the lobby. The question is that new clause 24 be read a second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Lincoln Jop and Alicia Kearns. The tellers for the noes, Mark Ferguson and Taiwo Owatemi.